Bonjour et bienvenue.
Good afternoon and welcome, everyone.
Now, I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 20 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on National Defence. La réunion d'aujourd'hui.
Today's meeting is being held in hybrid format pursuant to the order of the House adopted on January 25th, 2020, and members may attend in person or using the Zoom application. The proceedings will be made available on the House of Commons website. For your information, the webcast will always show the person who is speaking rather than the entire committee.
Participating virtually, I would like to outline a few rules to follow. You may speak in the official language of your choice, and interpretation services are available for this meeting. If interpretation is lost, please inform me immediately, and we will ensure that the interpretation is properly restored before we continue. All right. So when speaking, and I say this as a reminder to myself, more than a reminder to you, please speak slowly and clearly in order to help our interpreters do this challenging job with us today. And when you're not speaking, please put your mic on mute. We will do our very best between the clerk and myself to maintain a consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether they're participating virtually or in person. But first, before we begin today, we have a couple of pieces of urgent business, and it's something we've been putting off for about the last month, but we really have to address it. It shall only take a couple of minutes, and then we need to adopt a budget on the committee study of the impacts of COVID-19 on the CAF operations. You've all received the budget details by emails. It includes witnesses' expenses, meals, and telephone lines. Do I have agreement to adopt the proposed budget in the amount of $3,000 for the access to mental health services with the Canadian Armed Forces? No? We're good? All agreed? Okay, carried. Do I have agreement to adopt the proposed budget in the amount of $2,775 for the study of the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic on the Canadian Armed Forces operations? Agreed? Agreed. Okay, carried. Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Madame Vanderbilt.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm just raising a point of order so that I can apologize to the committee. In the last session, I had some erroneous information that I then transferred to the committee about the health of Mr. Warnick, who, as I've learned since then, is not in ill health. And therefore, I think it would be probably suitable for us to just have him added to the list of witnesses that you plan to invite, Madam Chair. And I'm very sorry to the committee for having relayed information that turns out not to have been accurate.
Go ahead, Mr. Bazan.
Yeah, and I just want to say appreciate the Parliamentary Secretary's explanation and apology. We did circulate a motion. Can we just accept the motion that was circulated? I'll drop it. That we call Michael Warnick to committee, and that we have him up here after the break week.
Okay, go ahead, Madame Vanderbilt.
I do believe that the motion said summon. I think I would just rather that we invite.
That he is prepared to attend,
Yeah.
and we can invite him after the break week.
After the break week. Is that, everyone agreed with that?
Agreed.
Agreed? Okay, so carried. All right, one other thing that you didn't have. Okay. All right. So on the motion that we adopted earlier this week, there are a couple of witnesses we are having trouble with finding. So please, whoever submitted the witness, please submit communications details as well, whether that's an email or a telephone number, if you can have them. Okay. All right. The clerk will reach out to you and tell you who they're having a hard time contacting. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, I think you might also find from the committee members, the wording of the motion might require 4 or 5 meetings in the next constituency week. So I think that there would be some flexibility to the chair to look at that in terms of when the members, when the witnesses might appear, to see that they may be able to do it during the following sitting week.
All right, and Mr. Bazan.
Yeah, and then knowing that as conservatives, we have convention at the end of the week. If we are having any meetings, our Monday regular scheduled time, if we have to do extra hours, let's do that for Monday, but then let's, whoever's not available for Monday, then we can move that down to the following week.
Thank you for your flexibility. I think that that will help the clerk because he's been trying to get in contact people and give them enough notice in order that they could appear before.
Do we have an indication that people are available for Monday, though?
Not yet.
If we can
Not
nail
yet.
that down, I think
Okay,
it's,
but
even if Mr. Wernick's available on Monday, we'll take him on Monday.
okay, all right. So the clerk will reach out to you, and so we've put the invitations out to all those we have contact with, and then the clerk will follow up today. If you could get them, send out who you need information for to the relevant members, and then we'll make an effort today if you have further communications contact details for us. Okay. All right then. Thank you very much. Very helpful and cooperative there, and much appreciated. All right, let's carry on to our study.
Madam Chair?
Go ahead. Is that Mr. Baker?
That's right. I just wanted to speak to the last topic. I wanted to simply add that what Ms. Van Meld proposed, and I think it's also important that this study is incredibly important, but so is the work that I think we do in our constituencies during these constituency weeks, and so I think it's important that to the extent that we can, that we allow time for us as members to be able to spend that time, whether that's on phone calls or Zoom calls or working on our constituency related matters. And so I wanted to flag that concern. We've had a number of committee meetings during constituency weeks, and I think that is important work, but if repeated, it takes away from our ability to serve our constituents. And I want to flag that concern. And so to ask that we consider that as we're thinking about the scheduling of these meetings, both next week and in the future.
All right. Go ahead, Mr. Bazan.
Well, just to reply to that, and I wanted to say that, I appreciate that all of us have constituency issues that we have to deal with, but we're also talking about sexual misconduct in Canadian Armed Forces. We were talking about making sure that we provide confidence and trust and improve morale within the armed forces. They are right now in a real tough situation, desperate times when we have sexual misconduct happening at the highest levels and a potential cover-up. So I think, Madam Chair, that this is important work that shouldn't be delayed, and so we are being flexible here, and one day next week to do committee business would be very helpful in moving forward in an expeditious manner without taking too much away from our time in our ridings.
Anyone else? All right. Thank you very much. Okay, then we'll continue. Good. Okay, 2. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, February the 9th, 2021, the committee is resuming its study of addressing sexual misconduct issues in the Canadian Armed Forces, including the allegations against former Chief of the Defence Staff, Jonathan Vance. With us today by video conference, Lieutenant Commander Raymond Trotter. Up to 10 minutes will be given for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. All right, welcome, and thank you for joining us today, Lieutenant Commander Trotter. I now invite you to make an opening statement. Please proceed.
Good day, Madam Chair and committee members. Thank you for your time to hear my testimony today. I'd also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge and thank all of my fellow and current and former Canadian Armed Forces service members for their service to this great nation. My name is Raymond Trotter, and I'm a Lieutenant Commander in the Royal Canadian Navy stationed in CFB Esquimalt. I have 21 years of service in the Navy. Outside of my naval service specific, I do have service with the Army in that I volunteered at the height of the Afghanistan conflict and served in Kandahar in 2008 and 2009. And from that to this day, I still suffer from general anxiety disorder and severe depression from my time during that conflict. It is my understanding that I have been summoned to this committee to answer questions and address my recent experiences with Operation Honor and sexual misconduct reporting in the Canadian Armed Forces. I will provide you with an opening statement that may address some of your questions. As for many within the Canadian Armed Forces, I was shaken when I learned about sexual misconduct allegations against General Vance, our former Chief of Defence Staff. Having worked so hard to progress in rooting out sexual harassment and misconduct in the military, it was a big blow to the Canadian Armed Forces. Shortly after the allegations about General Vance became public, I had an interaction with a Canadian Armed Forces member on the February 3rd who related to me a traumatic incident that implicated the current Chief of Defence Staff, Admiral Art MacDonald, in allegations of serious sexual misconduct. The complainant was fearful about reporting the incident when I advised that I was obligated to report the information as it involves very serious allegations of misconduct by another member of the Canadian Armed Forces. She indicated she understood but implored me to keep her name and information confidential. I found myself in a very difficult position. I understood it was my legal and also my ethical duty as an officer to report these serious allegations, but it was very less clear to me to whom I should report an allegation about the Chief of Defence Staff. The matter was further complicated by the complainant's fears and her requests that her name be kept confidential. That same day, I did inform my commanding officer of the matter. I indicated to my commander that a serious allegation against a senior officer had been reported to me, but that I needed to keep the details confidential. I informed my commander that I would take appropriate steps to report the sensitive matter and simply wanted him to be aware. I had the confidence of my commanding officer, and he indicated that he trusted me to do the right thing. For the rest of that day, I weighed the appropriate course of action. There was no policy guidance in the Operation Honor directives for a situation like this. Normally, an allegation of sexual misconduct should be reported to the commanding officer of the respondent. But there was no military commanding office in this case. The Chief of Defence Staff is at the top. I also did not feel comfortable reporting the matter to the CF National Investigation Service, as they are within the chain of command and ultimately report to the Chief of Defence Staff. After considering the matter further, I decided that I should report it to the Sexual Misconduct Response Center, or perhaps the Officer of the Minister of National Defence. On the next day, on Thursday, February 4th, I called the Sexual Misconduct Response Center, or SMRC, first thing in the morning. I explained that I wanted to report an incident of sexual misconduct involving a senior officer. I was advised by the intake officer that the SMRC is not a reporting tool and that their role was to assist with counseling, guidance, and support for complainants. I then called a phone number for the officer of the Minister of National Defence in Ottawa. I spoke to someone who I understood was a civilian employee, something like a switchboard. I identified myself and explained to the call taker that I wanted to speak to someone within the minister's office, as I wanted to report a serious sexual misconduct incident involving a high-ranking officer. I said I needed to protect the details until I spoke to someone with appropriate authority. I was placed on hold, and then another person came on the line who I understood to be his supervisor. He asked me to confirm my rank, name, and organization, which I did. He checked me against the Canadian Forces database, the Defence Wide Area Network, and confirmed who I was. I explained again that I needed to report a serious allegation of misconduct involving a high-ranking officer to the minister's office, and that the matter was sensitive. The supervisor took my phone number and said someone from the minister's office would be in contact with me. A few hours later, on February 4th, the SMRC intake officer called me back and explained that after checking up several levels within her supervisory structure, she could confirm that the SMRC was not a reporting mechanism. It was recommended that I should report it to the Minister of National Defence Office or the CFNIS. I explained that I was uncomfortable with going to the CFNIS, given that the respondent was very high ranking and the CFNIS would be potentially in a conflict of interest. The call ended on that note. Later that same day, I received a call from someone in the minister's office. She identified herself as the chief of staff to the minister. At this point, I believed I was in contact with an appropriate authority, and I told her I needed to report allegations of sexual misconduct against the chief of defense staff. She responded that allegations against General Vance were already reported in the press. I then clarified the allegations were about the current Chief of Defense Staff, Admiral Art MacDonald. I recall that she was very surprised by this revelation. The person who identified as the Chief of Staff directed me to report the incident to the SMRC. I advised that I had already done that and that the SMRC had already told me twice that they were not the appropriate reporting mechanism. I said the SMRC had suggested that I should report the incident to the minister's office as there was no one else senior to the Chief of Defense Staff. The Chief of Staff, as she described herself, told me she would look into it and get back to me. Before I heard from her again, i.e. the minister's office, I was called by a warrant officer with the Canadian Forces National Investigation Services in Ottawa in circles all day. And I said I was willing to talk about it. The warrant officer advised that I would be contacted by CFNIS, Canadian Forces National Investigation Services, in Esquimalt, which is where I'm based. My last call of the day was from the minister's office again. The person who identified themselves as the chief of staff advised me she had spoken to a subject matter expert in the deputy minister's office and told me that it was in their view that the SMRC was the appropriate reporting tool to respond to a complaint like this. I reiterated in detail my interactions with the SMRC and indicated that I felt the subject matter expert she consulted was wrong. She was surprised by this and said that she would be bringing the allegation itself to the minister. The following day, on February 5th, I was contacted by Canadian Forces National Investigation Services in Esquimalt. I was invited to attend an interview that day, and I did attend. I provided a statement. Nearly 3 weeks later, Admiral Art MacDonald stepped away from his duties as Chief of Defense Staff. This is very difficult for me as I was trying to do my duty to the Canadian Armed Forces and to the complaint. I wish there had been more guidance for me. There are many policies, but I am unsure if Operation Honor has been widely accepted within the Canadian Armed Forces yet. I was involved in another sexual misconduct report later in February, i.e. the next week. And I was disappointed in that experience as well. As some senior personnel I interacted with minimized this other incident, and in fact, I was berated in a very demeaning manner for following through on my reporting. I believe I was treated this way because the complaint was also about another senior officer. It was a very discouraging and disappointing experience. In this environment, I can certainly understand why so many victims of sexual misconduct would be reluctant to come forward. Thank you, Madam Chair. That concludes my opening statement.
All right. Thank you very much, Lieutenant Commander Trotter. Now we're up to, it disappeared. Madame Alislev. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you so very much for coming today and for testifying. And even more so for taking the action that you did in order to report this. Because there can be no system, there can be no justice if honorable men don't stand and do what is right, even when it is not easy. And by all of your account, this was anything but easy. So thank you very much. I wonder if you could give us just a little bit more information on how when you were talking to the minister's office, or you thought you were talking to the minister's office, if in fact you were talking to the minister's office, the chief of staff from the minister.
That's a very good question. So what I understand your question to be is how did I, identify the veracity of the person's claim that they were the chief of staff of the minister? It was a 613 number identified. I'd have to look back at my call logs. 613 being an Ottawa number. I believe it even maybe said, like on my iPhone, something to the effect of national defense or minister's office or something to that effect. She spoke very confidently, as if she was a very experienced public servant, and she did identify herself by name. I didn't know her name. I didn't look it up or anything like that. But it's based simply on that. That I believed at that point that I was.
And from your perspective, you believed that she was the chief of staff to the Minister of National Defense, correct?
That's correct, ma'am.
Right. When you were talking, I don't want you to give us any information, any details about the actual incident, but I'm wondering if you could tell us, because it has been reported in the news, if the incident that you were looking to report was widely known. Were there a lot of people at this incident where the misconduct occurred?
Ma'am, that's a difficult question, and I think I'm not in a position to share the details at this point about the complainant or the complaint or what occurred, simply because she entrusted me with her information on a confidential basis. I've shared that information with the appropriate authorities, and as we all know, the matter is now being investigated by the National Investigation Service. So I don't feel comfortable, and I don't think it's within my purview to get into that, which may potentially put the complaint in an uncomfortable situation.
Would you feel comfortable letting us know if, in your opinion and your understanding of the incident, you were the only one who could have reported this incident? Or, to your understanding, may there have been other individuals who would have had the same duty and obligation as you did to report?
Ma'am, as I was not actually there at the to witness the incident, what has been relayed to me, there is a potential that yes, there could be other people that could have witnessed it and reported it. But again, I don't want to be in a place of conjecture where I'm inferring that that is indeed the fact. But there is the potential that there was other people who could have seen it and could have reported.
Thank you very much. Could you also let us know if you felt that you were pressured in any way in this or other instances to not come forward and report this type of misconduct?
Ma'am, that's a difficult question to answer again. Me personally, like my personal conviction as an officer of the Canadian Armed Forces, I will put the service and my service members above my own needs and safety. So in that regard, I don't feel as though I've been pressured to not report things. And I can say with conviction that I have never not reported things. But with respect to is there pressure to not report things? Again, I think that would be a juxtaposition on my part, getting into the heads of others whether they wanted to pressure me or not.
But you did mention that you were in fact berated for a different incident, but for pressing forward to investigate misconduct and report in another situation.
Yes, ma'am. And I can provide, I've got sort of a scripted so I can keep it succinct for you here. So as it was reported to me, there was a Zoom call for career management of naval technical officers, of which over 100 people were on the Zoom call, including a large number of officers, mainly officers, including senior officers at the rank of Captain Navy, which is the equivalent of a colonel in the Army. A senior officer made a comment about a female member's room, which he could see in the background. He referred to it as her red room, which many on the call took to be a reference to the movie 50 Shades of Grey. Several other members in that Zoom call followed up to echo this comparison and make inappropriate sexual remarks. There were many women on this call. One female CAF member made a complaint to me about this issue, which I reported up my chain because in this instance, she did want to be identified. And I also entered it into the OPTAS, the Operation Honor Tracking and Analysis System. As I understand it, someone else from another unit also made a complaint about this incident. However, there was no entry in OPTAS about it. Mine was the only entry.
Right.
And the
Thank you very
investigation.
much for your courage to put country above of everything else.
Thank you very much. On to Madame Vanderbilt, please.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Commander. I would also like to start by thanking you very much for your service, for your 21 years of service, and even more importantly, for what you're doing today. I think that this is an example for everyone in the Canadian Armed Forces on how we need everybody to support those who are facing this kind of unacceptable behavior. So I do want to start by thanking you for that. I was listening to your testimony, and I'd like to clarify the issue of who you spoke to, because I don't know if you said that it was a woman who you thought was the Chief of Staff to the Minister of Defense.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
The Chief of Staff to the Minister of Defense is a man named George. I know that his contact information is in the government system, what's called GEDS. So is it possible that it was somebody, could it have been somebody from the Deputy Minister's office? Is it possible that you misheard?
That's a good question, ma'am. I don't have access to GEDS, so I couldn't verify that. The name that she gave me was Amelie, and I had asked Emily, and she said, no, Amelie, spelled with an A. Now, I had asked, whether it was legal counsel or somebody else who could identify, somebody by that name, and somebody had given me the name of Amelie Armstrong.
So I guess just for clarification, there isn't anybody in the minister's office by that name. So, but thank you for raising that, because I think that could be where there may be some confusion. I do think, though, what happened after that? How long was it before you got a call from the National Investigative Service after you made that phone call? Did anything come out of that phone call?
So I'd have to refer back to my notes here. You mean that because there was two calls I got from the National Investigation Service, one from the warrant officer in Ottawa and one from Esquimalt.
Yeah, I would be interested to know exactly what the chain of events at that point was. I guess what I'm asking is that you did speak to somebody. You've given the name that apparently is not somebody from the minister's office, but that person. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, did that person then take it further? Did they take action? Was there something that came out of that?
They had relayed to me that they were going to bring the allegation to the minister. That was their statement to me.
Okay, and then you said 2 calls from the National Investigation Service after that?
Yes, so I do have a document here I'm just bringing up because it's got a chronology of events, which could, so I don't confuse the matter here. So it was on February 4th at 2:47 p.m. Pacific time that I received the call from warrant officer at the warrant officer at CFNIS in Ottawa, and he was inquiring about the complaint's complaint. And you had another question there about a different timing.
Well, you had mentioned 2 calls. What was the other call?
About from CFNIS.
Yeah.
So that would have been the next morning. I got a call from CFNIS in Esquimalt. I think the time was approximately 8 o'clock in the morning, sort of start of business.
Okay, so whoever it was that you spoke to, that you thought was in the minister's office, it was less than 24 hours before the CFNIS was in touch with you to try to follow up. Is that correct?
That's affirmative, ma'am. But like I'd have to go back to my statement earlier that the warrant officer in Ottawa told me that he was getting in contact with me because of what he received from the SMRC and not any reporting through the minister's office.
Okay. And I also would like to acknowledge what you said. I mean, we all know that this is unprecedented. The system was not set up for the Chief of Defense Staff if there was something against the chief himself. And I can completely understand that we need to make sure that we have clearer systems and clearer processes. But I do want to thank you again for making the efforts that you did to try to make sure that something came of this. And I would just like to, so following that, it was a matter of a few weeks that when the Chief of Defense Staff, then Admiral MacDonald, learned that he was under investigation, that he immediately stepped away from that position. Would you imagine that that was exactly for that reason, that he couldn't be acting as the Chief of Defense Staff if he knew he was under investigation? And would that then remove that obstacle, which is the fact that there is nobody, as you mentioned, that would be higher than him? Do you think that it is now possible then, having the investigation ongoing, knowing that there was very quick action? It sounds like you got 3 phone calls within a day of your call, that now it is possible that the investigation may actually be able to proceed and find justice, real justice, for the complainant that you're doing this for.
So to just so I can understand your question, you're asking whether the allegation against Admiral MacDonald can proceed sort of in a fair manner now that he's stepped aside as the Chief of Defense Staff. Is that your question?
Both. The fact that there was immediate action that was taken, then he stepped back, and now there is an ongoing investigation. So yes, that would be my question.
Okay. So with respect to the timing about him stepping aside, stepping back, as it relates to my reporting, I can't honestly answer that with any certainty. It would be again conjecture on my part. With respect to the investigation into Admiral MacDonald by the appropriate authorities, again, I think I would have to refer that matter to somebody well above my pay grade to answer that kind of question, who has more knowledge on the matter.
All right. I'm sorry, Madame. Your time is up. Monsieur Brunet-Duceppe. Oh, do we have... Monsieur Fortin.
Mr. Fortin. Yes, Mr. Fortin. Thank you, Madam Chair. No, don't be sorry. It makes me feel younger when you call me Mr. Brunet-Duceppe. Mr. Trotter, thank you for joining us today. I know, like my colleagues, that it has been a hard time for you. And I can only recognize your courage, and I thank you for it. That being said, to start, Mr. Trotter, you referred a few moments ago in a question to by my colleague that you referred to a chronology that you prepared. Would it be possible for you to send a copy to the committee?
I'm going to have to interject there because my French is my use of French is quite old, and the interpretation service right now is just simply not working for me.
Madame la Présidente.
Stand by.
Ouais.
Yeah.
This is the interpreter. Can you hear the English interpretation? This is the English channel. This is the English interpreter. Can you hear the English interpreter?
Okay, Monsieur Fortin, est-ce que vous pouvez poser...
Mr. Felton, can you ask the question again, please? I will restart the question. I understand that time starts back at 0 because I wasn't able to use my time previously. Can you reset the clock?
Mr. Trotter is having trouble getting the interpretation still? Or does it work?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm only able to hear Mr. Fortin. I'm not able to hear anything in English. My apologies.
So if we can just make sure that he has selected English in the interpretation button.
Coach him through that, clerk? Make sure he's selected. Okay, we'll stop the clock here.
Ma'am, I believe I've
Oh, thank you very much. All right, go ahead, Mr. Fortin. Would you try it again?
Oui, Madame.
Yes, Madam Chair. Can you hear me now, Mr. Trotter? Can you hear the interpretation? So, Madam Chair, I understand that my timer is starting at 0 now. Can you confirm that for me? Yes, that's fine. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Trotter, I will repeat what I was saying earlier. Thank you for being here. I acknowledge that my colleagues who spoke before and everyone around the table realize this has been a difficult time for you, and it requires a lot of courage to come here and speak to us of these difficult times. Thank you. So that being said, I would like to start with the fact that you referred to a chronology to my colleague, Ms. Manderveld. Could you send us a copy of this chronology?
Essentially relayed between me and my legal counsel. If I may request that I could have some conference with him on version editing and back and forth before I and potentially have him submit that, or I can submit it, but have that opportunity just so it meets a certain standard.
Oui. J'ai pas de problème.
Yes, I have no problem that you about you speaking to your legal counsel for this. It would be very useful for the committee to be able to refer to this chronology. So I will wait for your answer on that. That being said, I won't repeat the questions that have already been asked of you, but I understood what you did after you received the complaint from this victim. I would like to know, is there any point at which you discussed this issue directly with Mr. McDonald?
Okay. Est-ce que vous en avez?
Did you discuss it again with the victim since you met her? You met her originally. Did you see this victim subsequently?
Sir, yes, I have. I have been in almost constant communication with the victim because, as my duties as a Canadian Forces officer, I feel that I'm obliged to, as part of the chain of command, provide all of the necessary support and services and refer her to appropriate services.
Okay. Est-ce que...
Do you know if the victim herself had discussions about this with Mr. McDonald?
Again, I don't feel I'm in a position to state whether she did or did not, because like I would have to refer that again to the complaint or the the National Investigation Services.
OK. Est-ce que vous
Can you tell me if she already had discussions with the Minister of Defense or a member of their staff?
Sir, as it was related to me, no, she did not. And reporting to the chain of command, likely I was her first point of contact because she trusted me.
OK. Est-ce que
Did you at any time have a discussion directly with the Minister of Defense?
No, sir.
OK. Est-ce que
Did you attempt to speak directly with the minister? I know there were discussions with their staff, but did you approach, undertake, or did you try to speak directly with the minister?
Sir, I believe at my rank and pay level, I made my best attempts to get it up to as high as possible. And like I said in my earlier statement, I felt I'd been running in circles all day, that I had an appropriate person.
So the answer is no. I'm sorry, I don't want to rush you, but we don't have a lot of time. So I understand that you did not approach the minister. And to your knowledge, the victim also did not approach the minister to discuss the situation, to your knowledge.
Merci, monsieur. J'aimerais que vous me...
Thank you. We saw in the media that you were subjected to threats after you spoke up about this. So I'd like you to tell us more about it. What happened exactly? People tried to prevent you from going further with the minister and their staff. Is that right?
Sir, with respect to the threats, it is my understanding, again, that these incidents are under investigation by the Canadian Forces National Investigation Service. And I don't think it's appropriate for me at this point to speak further about the matter as a participant in the investigation.
Okay. The
events that are the subject of the study go back to when? On what date did this happen?
Maybe I don't understand the question. Could you rephrase that?
Vous avez été l'objet de menaces.
You have been subjected to threats that are being investigated. I understand. You're telling me you can't give me any details. I respect that. I wanted to know, at what time were these threats made? What date?
The 4th of March, sir.
Est-ce qu'il y a eu des récidives de...
Was this repeated again since?
No, sir.
Okay. Donc, il y a seulement...
So there is just one investigation currently on this, and this investigation on things that happened on March 4th, 2021.
Yes, sir.
Thank you
Merci.
very much. On to Mr. Garrison, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, and I, of course, want to start by giving my thanks to Commander Trotter for appearing before us today, and also for his many years of service. And he does exemplify, I think, what we all hope to see from members of the Canadian Forces when it comes to attacking this problem of a culture which tolerates sexual misconduct. So very sincere thanks to you. I think we're, again, in committee today, getting into the narrative which disturbs me, which is about knocking on the wrong door. And so I guess my question to Lieutenant Commander Trotter is, has he had discussions with others who had the same problem that he had in attempting to report incidents of sexual misconduct. In other words, it's difficult to know where to take those. Have you discussions with others who found the same problem?
I don't think I've had discussions with people who have had difficulty reporting. Potentially, they don't know who to report or where to turn to. Maybe they feel pressured to not. But again, I can't get inside the heads of people who want to report, because somebody who's been the victim of something like that, it's difficult from the outset. So I'm just going to leave it at that, sir.
And again, I do appreciate your careful testimony and your avoidance of speculation. And I also don't want to ask any questions that lead to revealing details of incidents. But I think what struck me in your recount of the events here was that it's the fact that it involved a senior officer. The complaints involved both these incidents you're talking about involved senior officers within the chain of command. And that's what seems to have created the difficulty in figuring out how to deal with them appropriately. Would that be a fair statement?
Yes, sir. And I did have an additional portion to explain about that other incident if you wanted me to relay that to you.
Please go ahead.
Okay. So after that female complainant came forward to me to make the report about the Red Room incident, as I understood it, someone else came forward about the incident. However, there was no entry in the database about it. I was the first one to put an entry into the database. And the investigation of the complaint was assigned of a separate. There was a separate complaint that was assigned to a chief petty officer, who is a subordinate to the senior officer who made the initial comment about the Red Room, who is the respondent. And when I raised the concerns about the conflict of interest of the investigator, the chief petty officer, a senior officer that I was speaking with minimized the incident, saying the respondent didn't know what he was talking about, and wasn't referring to sexually explicit movie. It seemed to me that this was prejudging and predetermining an outcome. It was a little bit later that I had contacted a separate senior person at formation headquarters, like on the coast here, who is a civil servant, but also a retired naval captain. And when I contacted them about my report about Optast, so I made sure that all the reporting I had made was correct. That senior person raised his voice and spoke to me in a very demeaning manner, indicating, and pardon my language, that I had fucked up and I had ruined the respondent's career over nothing.
So earlier in your testimony, you referred to your feeling that Operation Honor wasn't fully accepted by everyone within the Canadian Forces. And so is this kind of reaction what you're talking about when you're saying that you feel it's not always fully accepted?
Sorry, could you pose a question? I didn't understand whether there was a question there.
So you said earlier in your testimony that you felt that Operation Honor wasn't always fully accepted within the Canadian Forces by everyone. And I'm asking whether this reaction to your attempt to report something which was clearly required by the policies laid out, do you believe this is an example of the lack of full accepting, or maybe the full understanding of what's required to stamp out sexual misconduct?
So I think there's two parts to that answer, sir. The first part is the acceptance of Operation Honor amongst the majority of the forces, the working class of the forces, and the veracity of it, and whether it's working. And then the second part of that answer is when reporting on senior officers within Optast, which is the reporting mechanism for Operation Honor. It almost seemed to me that as a result of that phone call, there is a dual standard reporting in OPTAS, such that maybe if you were a sergeant, it would be okay, but if you're a colonel or a captain Navy, it's not okay to put, that sort of name into that central repository.
And with regard to once you've filed a complaint or an allegation in the system, is there a way that this gets reported back to you of where it's been assigned and who's taking care of it and what the outcome will be?
So that's a very good question, sir. What typically happens is, as a unit office of primary interest for OPTAS, I collect the information and put it into the database. It is then passed to my L2 and L3, or sorry, L2 and L1. So because they have, I guess, what you would call Uber users who, verify the information. Now, where it ultimately ends to get investigated, I think, again, that might be above my pay grade, depending on who the respondent is, to answer the question on not only the rank of the respondent, what the allegation is. It's probably above my pay grade and outside of my subject matter expertise to answer how that investigation could be conducted.
All right, thank you very much. On to Madame Gallant, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to our witness. Amelia said the complaint would be taken to the minister. With respect to the Chief of Defense Staff, to the Department Assistance Office that directly supports the minister and directly engages with his staff. So that's who Amelia is. I just want to confirm. You knew who she was?
To answer your question, ma'am, I don't, with my rank and position and my access to GEDS, the database, it was very difficult for me to authenticate the information, but based off of the conversation that I was having, the fact that she was calling me back with information about my initial calls, and she explained her name to me and her role, I thought that I was speaking with the Chief of Staff to the Minister of National Defense at the time.
Okay, so if she is the assistant that directly supports the minister's office and directly engages with his staff, so if she said she was taking the issue to the minister, she definitely did have access to the minister. I'm just stating that as a fact. So did she tell you that she was taking the issue to the minister?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so did that person explain why she didn't take your complaint the first time that you called?
Well, so she did try to redirect me to a more appropriate place. I can't get into the headspace about why she did or didn't want to. And I again, because this is a difficult situation for me to know where to report it, I needed to hear it out. I needed to hear the points of view. I hope that answers your question.
National Defense follow up with you after they advised you to report the allegation to the Canadian Forces National Investigative Service?
Sorry, ma'am, the first 3 seconds of your question was
Did
cut out there.
Did anyone from the National Defense follow up with you after they advised you to report the allegation to the CFNIS?
Nobody from the Canadian Forces outside of the CFNIS has followed up with me about it, other than once the story hit the news and my name got into the news, I had tons of support from the chain of command about it, but not necessarily about this incident.
Okay. So in your experience, is there a two-tier reporting system for sexual misconduct in the Canadian Armed Forces?
Could you try to reframe that just better, so I better understand it.
You had mentioned that somebody said, well, if you were a sergeant, maybe this would have made sense. So that kind of implies that there may be some sort of two-tier reporting system for sexual misconduct in the Canadian Armed Forces. Has that been your experience in reporting?
I would say that that's above my pay grade, but what I can comment on is only what I observe. And from my limited experience, I can say that it appears that senior officers seem to get special treatment when there are sexual misconduct allegations. I think that may be because the people who are responsible for dealing with sexual misconduct allegations are senior officers, and that they may have some background or professional connections with respondent officers. You know, I've heard in terms of sort of like the old boys network amongst the senior ranks.
Okay, so in the first incident that you reported in February, not the Red Room incident, the first one, when was that incident supposed to have occurred? It got reported later on in time than when it immediately happened. So was there an indication, and what was the indication of the time that it had occurred and then subsequently being reported to you?
Ma'am, are you speaking about the actual act of the sexual misconduct or the report that came to me?
Actual act, incident.
Okay, so again, because the matter's with the Canadian Forces National Investigation Service, and I have an obligation to the complainant. I think if I get into any detail, that I could be put into a position where I'm either breaching CFNIS, whatever they have.
Okay, so is it a matter of years or months?
That again, ma'am, I'm going to have to refer to CFNIS.
I'm sorry, unfortunately, your time is it's on up to Monsieur Robillard, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Lieutenant Commander Trotter, thank you for your appearance before committee today. I would also like to thank you for your courage and your sense of responsibility. You're a model for all officers who must be the allies of survivors, and for that I thank you. Now, here's my question. According to the Canadian Armed Forces, the strategy of the path to dignity and respect was created under Operation Honor because it needed to move toward an institutional approach that was more broad and supported. And that meant a change of culture in the Canadian Armed Forces. In your opinion, have initiatives like Operation Honor changed the culture of the sexualization within the Canadian Armed Forces? If yes, then why? And if not, then why not?
So, sir, I can speak to my experiences, and I'll keep it to that. I think Operation Honor is a step in the right direction, and it has enabled people who would otherwise potentially feel uncomfortable, given them a platform. You know, we've in recent history. You know, the Me Too movement, you know, the Me Too movement, how it played out in Hollywood, how it's played out in other industries, about, you know, sexual misconduct. Operation Honor was a step in the right direction. But I think, in my humble opinion, I think we're at a turning point now where we've put it on paper. We've said this is what the policy is, but it's going to take the courage of a lot of individuals to step forward to really delve into to the issues and solve the problem if we get you know, once we can get to a point to solve the problem. Sorry, sir, your your mic's muted.
OK. Selon
According to the Canadian Armed Forces, the strategy for a path to respect and dignity includes a new performance measurement of the strategy throughout its implementation. How do members and managers of the Canadian Armed Forces, how have they been informed of this program? Would you say that the Canadian Armed Forces are prioritizing its implementation?
Sir, I believe that the Canadian Armed Forces is prioritizing its implementation, but I think what your question is referring to is how is management and leadership passing the information with respect to, say, the analytics that fall out of operation like OPTAS? Where are the problem areas, how we can address them, how we can tackle them? I think that's, again, well above my pay grade to answer that question. That's probably at the L1 and L0 level to answer that sort of topic.
dans quelle mesure
How do gestures contribute to the achieving the objectives in the of the program, and how are they included in the performance measurements?
Sorry, sir, I'm going to have to ask you to rephrase that question because I didn't completely understand. I don't want to give you the wrong answer.
dans quelle mesure
How are the gestures that contribute positively to achieving the objectives of the strategy, how are they included in their performance evaluations?
Again, I want to answer this. Now, when you speak about performance evaluations, which performance evaluations are you speaking about? Like an individual's personnel evaluation at the end of the year, or the evaluation of OPTAS itself?
Yeah, the first one.
I don't know, and I haven't seen it necessarily in other people's personnel evaluation reports about Operation Honor or the implementation of it. And so I really can't speak to that because those evaluations are protected B information. But I can't recall ever seeing mentions about metrics or how people are performing in those areas.
All right, thank you. Merci
Thank
beaucoup.
you, sir.
On to Monsieur Fortin. And before we continue, Lieutenant Commander, could you just move your mic up slightly so it's slightly above your mouth rather than right at the mouth level? Because we get a kind of the interpreters get kind of like a popping sound when the mic is right in front of the mouth. But if you could just move it up slightly, then they won't get that popping sound. It'll be a lot easier on their ears. All right. And same with you as well, Monsieur Robillard, le même problème.
Mr. Robillard, you had the same problem.
All right. Thank you. On to Monsieur Fortin.
Mr. Fortin, you have the floor. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Trotter, I would like to know, the person who made the original complaint came to see you where? Did you already know her? Why did she reach out to you exactly?
Sir, yes, I did know her from previous service. We have a really good professional and personal connection. So I felt that I can't get into her head again, but she felt that she could trust me with the information. But yes, I did know her, but like about how, I don't want to get into that because again, I'll have to refer that to CFS.
No, that's okay. To your knowledge, Is this the only time this individual complained about a similar situation?
Sorry, could you rephrase that? Like this situation or multiple situations?
Non, je sais pas comment.
I don't, well, perhaps it was the interpreter who needs to rephrase things, but the question was simply, this person, to your knowledge, is this the only time that she has made a complaint about this type of situation?
Sir, again, I think if I were to answer that question, it may put the complainant into a position where she may be uncomfortable or may identify her. So again, I'm going to have to refer back to CFNIS for that information.
Okay.
Okay. You said earlier that you were surprised and shocked to learn about the allegations concerning Jonathan Vance. I understood that you learned about Mr. Vance's allegations after reporting Mr. McDonald's. Is that correct?
Sir, I believe, like I'd have to look at the timeline again, but the report made to me about the sexual misconduct regarding Admiral McDonald was made on February 3rd. I'd have to look back at the news feeds on when it came out about General Vance. I can't answer that right now. Sorry.
All right, thank you. Excusez-moi, but
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to pass my time in this round to my neighbor, MP Elizabeth May.
Deeply grateful, Randall, for the opportunity. And thank you, Lieutenant Commander Trotter. Your testimony has been extremely helpful. I want to dig in a little bit to the issue of how this is working, as Randall has already said, the narrative of knocking on the wrong door. And I guess I want to pick up with when you finally get the door open, does anyone answer? You made the comment that the issue of the Zoom call and what you viewed as inappropriate sexual innuendo around a female officer's background in the background of the room had been raised by someone else who came forward and was prepared to go on the record. But when you filed your complaint, you found that it was the first entry and there was nothing else in the data bank. I took it from what you said. I inferred that you had good reason to believe someone had actually complained, but that their complaint was not recorded. I'd like to make sure I understood what you said correctly. You had good reason to believe someone had complained on the record, but the complaint was not recorded.
Ma'am, that's correct. Again, I can't infer like who or how or what, but I was made aware by the complainant that made the complaint to me that there was, she had received an email from this chief petty officer doing the investigation. He didn't get the information from her, so there must have been somebody else who made a complaint about it. Whether it was on the record or not, I have no idea.
So the culture you've described here, the investigation by the petty officer who would be investigating his boss, if he took it seriously, was being treated by the culture that you encountered as something that you shouldn't have complained about, minimizing it. But it strikes me that this is an incident worth the committee's attention as a very clear indication of a cultural problem, that people could be on essentially a public call where a senior officer thought it was okay to communicate sexual innuendo with female officers present and not understand that what he was doing was wrong. Is that your sense from that experience?
Ma'am, I believe that incident is under investigation. For me to make inferences about what people thought, I think that would be inappropriate for me to comment on.
Okay. I'm sure my time is just about up. I just want to thank you again for coming forward and for standing up for women victims within the armed forces to clean up the culture there. We need more people like
Who
you.
is it
Thank you.
Is it Mr. Benson? All right, go ahead, Mr. Benson, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commander Trotter, for being here today. The Admiral MacDonald, he only stepped aside after the investigation about him was made public in the press. Commander Trotter, did the Canadian Forces National Investigation Services, did they contact you and have any discussions about how this information was leaked to the press?
No, sir.
Okay. I'm curious why you felt it was necessary to have a lawyer here today with you on your appearance.
Well, I don't believe he's actually on the call with me today, but I definitely needed, I'm not a lawyer. I drive warships for a living. If somebody wants to learn how to do that, I can teach you. But when it comes to parliamentary stuff, I obviously needed some sort of legal advice so that I didn't say anything that was out of bounds. But that's why.
Okay. Now I'm curious with some of the testimony you had about threats against you. Do you fear returning to work in the Canadian Navy after your testimony here today?
That is a very good question, sir. I have received phone calls from senior officers who I trust on this coast within senior levels, who have relayed to me that they have their trust in me, that I'm an asset to the organization, but I guess internalized to me, the feel like, you can tell somebody who's depressed, just don't be depressed. Well, okay. And the chain of command can reassure me, and they can do a lot of things for me to say you're an asset to this organization. But I ultimately, I'm here in front of the country talking about very sensitive things. So I would say that my future's uncertain. I don't know about how I feel about returning to work. Obviously, I'm going to have a discussion with my health team, integrated health team providers, and my chain of command. But I don't want to get too long-winded. I hope that answers the question.
No, but I think it's a worry that when you're coming forth to give this kind of information to this committee and to Canada, that you have to think about the fact that there might be reprisals to you when you go back to work, because that's what you're worried about. There could be setbacks for your career at this point, and you feel that's a possibility.
To answer your question, sir, yes, but the why is probably better. When I took a commission as an officer in the Canadian Armed Forces, I swore an oath to Queen and country to fulfill my duties. And there's, the old adage of service before self. So there may be blowback, there may be career implications. That's just juxtaposition. I don't know. But I have had assurances from some people in my chain of command that they have my back and that they trust me.
Okay. Because of the threats against you, did you feel at any point, or do you feel now, that you have to take any personal protective measures to protect yourself from any of these threats?
Yes.
What kind of protective measures are you taking or have taken?
So far, I am very engaged with my integrated health care team to make sure that my mental fitness is good, because if my mental fitness isn't good, I'm not good. Working on physical fitness as well. But with respect to my future, employment within the Canadian Forces. Everybody needs to pay bills. I have 4 young children. I have a wife who is a registered nurse student. And so I have concerns. But how those things transpire, I can't tell the future.
All right, thank you very much. On to Mr. Baker, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Trotter, for being here today and for your testimony. I wanted to ask a few questions on a range of topics, and hopefully I have enough time. Could you, in terms of, I understand that you've been asked by a number of MPs at this committee about sort of the timing of the alleged event, and you've not wanted to talk about it, understandably, because you're trying to protect the person who's come forward. Can you share is the incident that you're referring to one, and tell me if you can't answer this, but are you able to share with us if this is an incident that happened, after the appointment to Chief of Defense Staff?
From what I understand, okay, it happened prior to the appointment as Chief of Defense Staff. But to get into any further specifics about timeline, I'm basically going to provide the same answer about under investigation CFNIS.
Understood. That's understandable. We know that you spoke about someone who called Amelie, who contacted you. I think we know now that this is someone who is a chief of staff to the Departmental Assistance Office, so works within the department, not for the minister, the minister's office. But what I wanted to clear up with you, and I know you've agreed to have your lawyer look at your timeline of events and then share that with us. But can you just talk to us a little bit about the timing from the time that you reported this allegation to the time that the CFNIS contacted you? Can you tell me about that?
So yes, I can. My initial contact with the SMRC, because as I understand it, the first contact from CFNIS to me was from a warrant officer in Ottawa, who got the message passed to him from SMRC. Now, so the first time I talked to the SMRC was at 9 o'clock in the morning Pacific time on February 4th. And the second time, which I talked to the SMRC, they had actually called me back to verify that they're not a reporting tool, was at 12:52 p.m. Pacific time. So there was, say, a 4-hour time difference between the two SMRC calls, and then being contacted by CFNIS in Ottawa. That was roughly, say, 3 p.m. on February 4th. So it was another 2 hours from, say, this. Now, again, I don't know whether it's from my first call or my second call that made it to CFNIS.
Okay, but just for my clarity, and forgive me if I misunderstood, but for my clarity, this all happened on the same day. Am I understanding that correctly?
It did all happen on the same day, sir.
Okay, thank you. And so, can you just talk a little bit about, in my view, it's important that this committee, that what we're doing right now is understand how we can address this issue of sexual harassment, of sexual assault within Canadian Armed Forces. And so I'm wondering if you could share with us your thoughts on, you've spoken to, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Can you share with us how you think, what type of process should be undertaken when someone brings forward a complaint? What resources should be available to them? What how should that be, and what resources should be available to the person bringing forward the allegations? How should that investigation process be handled? The reporting, investigation, et cetera. Could you share your advice with us?
I would say again that kind of analysis, policy implementation, procedures are well above my pay grade. But at the coal face of it, you need to have somebody within your chain of command, hopefully an officer, if not a senior enlisted member, to trust to come forward to. That's what I can speak to, that there has to be that trust relationship. But, above that, well above my pay grade to answer those questions.
All right. Thank you very much. On to Mr. Bazan, please.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to thank Lieutenant Commander Trotter for his bravery of coming forward. Really appreciate that you exemplify what we expect in all our members of the Canadian Armed Forces, that you are truth, valor, and bravery and honor. So, you're doing all the right things and standing up for those that were subjected to sexual misconduct. And I just applaud you for it. And I know that there's many more in the Canadian Armed Forces, men and women, who would do exactly the same thing. And so you are leading by example. And we do know, and you do talk about the call and with Amelia Armstrong and Madam Chair, this is an individual of interest now. I believe that we need to have her before committee so that we can get her side of the story. But definitely you felt that you were talking to the Minister's office. And just as someone who used to be the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defence, I can tell you that the office of the Chief of Staff to the Department of National Defence is closer to the Minister's office than the Parliamentary Secretary's office is. And I know that Ms. Van de Velde would agree with that. We have an office that's down across the floor, but everybody's on the same floor. They're on the executive floor within the Department of National Defence. So there was nothing to say that she didn't walk down to the Minister's office just past the elevators and have that conversation with Minister's staff. So that's why we do need to talk to Ms. Armstrong. Now, I guess that you mentioned, Commander, about the special treatment that commanding officers seem to get and exemptions that they're given through any claims of sexual misconduct. And I don't know if you saw the Fifth Estate report last night where they were talking about the issues of, do we have bells or is that just the house closing? Just the house closing? Okay, sorry about that. But I just would say that there, in that story, again, is women getting sexually assaulted and other forms of sexual misconduct, and that through Operation Honor, rather than properly providing punitive penalties, all too often it is just administrative measures, and the careers of these perpetrators have been able to continue up the path. Would you agree with that, Commander, that it's not a harsh enough line being taken to change the culture within the Canadian Armed Forces when it comes down to sexual misconduct?
I would have to say again that the answer to that question is probably well above my pay grade. Maybe something that would require a look at by an independent body outside of the Canadian Armed Forces. I've never experienced a situation where there's been inappropriate behavior and the respondent is promoted and the complainant is left out. I've never personally come across those situations. I have the information that you have out of the Fifth Estate. So again, I don't think I'm in a position that I could provide good.
You did mention that not in the case that we're dealing with the Chief of Defence Staff right now. You made reference to the other situation that happened on the Zoom call, and then you had the Chief Petty Officer investigate his boss, which we know wouldn't result in a fair process for the victim. So again, that I think speaks to the bigger issue that, you know, the higher levels of command you go, the more they can influence and obstruct the justice and the investigations that need to take place. Would you agree with that?
In the instance that I spoke about, I would agree that there was a conflict of interest there, and that the appointed investigator was not the appropriate person, and I can speak to that one.
Okay, I appreciate that. Commander, without going into any details, and you've been very good at making sure that we don't interfere in the investigation against Admiral MacDonald, but would you say that if through the vetting process of trying to determine who the next Chief of Defense Staff, that if they had dug in deep enough, they would have uncovered the accusations or the allegations against Admiral MacDonald before they appointed him to CDS? Or do you feel that this was one of those situations that nobody else knew about?
I don't know the answer to that question, sir.
All right, thank you very much. On to Mr. Spengeman, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and Lieutenant Commander Trotter. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service in Afghanistan, the courage you have displayed there. Thank you for your courage today. I want to echo many of my colleagues in their comments that you exemplify the response and the ethic that should be present within the Canadian Forces on this particular issue systemically. I wanted to ask you a question with respect to, you've had some exchanges with colleagues on the fact that these are allegations against senior officers. And I just wanted to refer you and get your thoughts on the Department of Defense Administrative Directives. There's a Series 9000, and in particular 9005 sub 1 on reporting of sexual misconduct. Was that framework useful? Did you consult that when you made your decisions? And if it wasn't useful, what were some of the obstacles in that framework that potentially should be looked at and maybe changed?
Sir, yes, the framework was useful within that defense order. I had read it when it came out. I familiarized myself with it again when I undertook the training to be the OPTAS coordinator, OPTAS OPI for my unit. But with respect to the reporting about the Admiral MacDonald incident, I didn't necessarily have it sitting in front of me, and I don't think there was much guidance in there to help me in that situation. So I think it's useful and a step in the right direction. And the guidance in there is clear. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. That's helpful. Thank you, Lieutenant Commander. I want to thank you for your allyship. I think in a broader and deeper sense, I think it's incredibly important that this committee recognizes, and I think it has in so many ways, that women cannot and should not be doing this work alone. Not just obviously the most serious cases of allegations of harassment or assault, but also the general issue of gender equality and diversity and inclusion in the Canadian Forces. And I'm wondering if you could maybe spend a bit of time taking the committee through your career path and how your thoughts have evolved on this question of gender equality, how you've seen the culture evolve or change, or maybe it hasn't changed at all from when you started serving to where it is now. And if there's some good things that happened, what should the committee focus on with respect to recommendations to make sure that these good things are consolidated, but also broadened to really change the system to be much more reflective of what you're doing today in terms of coming forward and eliminating this kind of conduct?
Thank you for that question. I would say that my military service to this point, it started out at the Royal Military College of Canada after conducting basic training. It had been a number of years since women were introduced into the military college, naval service, submarine service. So for me, when I came into that environment, I can only speak for me. I think it was a very good environment and a trusting environment, and because that's the generation in which I grew up in the Navy. my experience, after leaving the Royal Military College, upon joining the fleet out here on the West Coast, I had mentors who, tutelage with respect to navigation and bridge watchkeeping on the bridge of a ship, female, executive officers. There's been other great examples of, great female leadership. So, with respect to my experiences, they've been very positive. Now, I can't speak to how the women feel about those experiences. And I think what's important here is that there is likely a generational divide within the Canadian Armed Forces about issues surrounding women in the service, LGBTQ, openness and sexual misconduct. That there is a certain sort of, as soon as you hit a certain rank and age level, above that is one type of culture, and then below that is a different type of culture. Now there might be a bit of a gray zone there where people were raised in both. I would say that definitely I'm in the lower half of that, where it's been positive for me, but I can't speak to the females that served alongside me.
Lieutenant Commander, thank you. I think I'm very short of time. If I could sneak in a very quick question.
No, I'm sorry, Mr.
No?
Spangaman.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Not
Thank
going to
you.
work today. Monsieur Fortin, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Fortin. Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, listen, I myself experienced the frustration of being in a party that the House didn't recognize. I think I will follow the example of my colleague, Mr. Garrison, and give time to our colleague, Miss Elizabeth May, who always has interesting questions to ask. So please, I give you my time.
Go ahead,
Merci,
Madame
mon
May.
cher ami.
Thank you, my dear friend.
Okay, so Lieutenant Commander Trotter, again, I want to go back to your conversation. I never heard of this. I'll be honest, I just looked up Amelie Armstrong. Chief of Staff is, I would say, other friends of mine around this table have put forward their views on this sort of thing. I've heard the term Chief of Staff in a political context only in relation to Chief of Staff to a minister, so I certainly understand why you would have thought that. I've never heard of a Chief of Staff to a department before, but that is apparently Amelie Armstrong's role, and I thank my colleague, Mr. Bazan, for suggesting she might be a witness. But when you contacted her and she was responding to the news that you were actually speaking to her about a sexual misconduct complaint about the newly appointed Chief of Staff, and you said she expressed surprise. At that point, were you surprised? It was only the next day, as I go through my notes, that you were called on at the Esquimalt base to report to an interview at what you thought would be the wrong place to go, the Canadian Armed Forces Investigations Unit, if I'm not mistaking and so you showed up there and had your interview there. Was the circumstances of how that was conducted, could you give us more details on that experience?
Yes. So it was conveyed to me by the warrant officer at CFNIS in Ottawa that he was with a liaison role with the SMRC. Mm-hmm. So there was maybe my trust with the SMRC and their role and how it translated to him because he's a liaison with them, and then his the way he transferred me to an appropriate authority within CFNIS on the coast. And I think, like I've said in my opening remarks there, for a full 24 hours or more, I had been running in circles. I thought it was enough was enough that I just needed to make a statement. And it was recorded. It was video recorded. There were other members. So the information was there. And I had to give my information because I really had, at that point, I don't think I had anywhere else to turn.
Right,
So,
thank you very
having-
much. I'm afraid your time is up, Madame.
Merci.
Mr. Garrison, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And again, I want to thank Lieutenant Commander Trotter for his testimony today. I think he's shed very valuable light on the question that is, as Ms. May pointed out, I like to refer to the wrong door defense, that somehow complainants and those who are reporting complaints are going to the wrong place. Also, very unfortunate but useful testimony on the reaction of hostility toward attempts to file a second complaint, and the thing which we can't talk about today, but the reality of threats that were made against you as a result of doing so. And I think you've also cast both positive and negative light on the culture of the Canadian Forces. And I want to state again how I do think you are a role model, and the role model that we do expect to see in the Canadian Forces. So I have a couple of simple questions here. We talk about the SMRC, we talk about the NFIS. Was it clear to you, and would it be clear to most members of Canadian Forces, that who these organizations report to?
I don't think it would be entirely clear to absolutely everybody in the Canadian Forces who these organizations report to. Like even the SMRC, I was unaware that they fell under the Deputy Minister. I thought it was just an independent body that was stood up by the Canadian Forces, but so I can't infer what other people think. With respect to the Canadian Forces National Investigation Service, I understand that there have been comments made in the media that they are independent of the chain of command. They're separate from the military police. And from what I know, and I've been able to look in the Canadian Forces structure, the CFNIS reports to the Provost Marshal to VCDS, VCDS to CDS. But that's only because I did a little bit more digging when somebody made that statement. So whether other people know that, again, I would have to, ask them.
But would you agree that it would be fair to say that anyone dealing with these difficult issues of sexual misconduct wouldn't presume that these organizations actually were independent of the chain of command that they're being forced to complain about when it involves senior officers?
Again, I can't get into other people's heads. I don't want to make decisions for other people, whether they trust them or not. I'm going to have to leave that up to those individuals.
Thank you very much. On to Madame Gallant, please.
To the witness, you had made mention of the tracking system and how you had looked at it, and there weren't any other entries for this particular incident. Is that the way they're shown in this tracking system? Could you see chronologically, or how would you even know that the incident had previously been reported or not reported?
Without getting into too much detail about how the incident was reported to me, it not only was it reported to me, but it was reported to me that this chief petty officer was put in charge of the investigation, and there was correspondence sent to me about the conduct of what he was investigating and how he was going to be investigating it. There was no reference to a file in this tracking system, OPTAS, being created. And if I log into this Operation Honor tracking system, I wouldn't necessarily be able to look into other people's, because it is very compartmentalized to protect information. But from what I understand and my current knowledge is that my report was the only report, simply based off of the conversations I had with senior formation officers and public servants, that it was my report in Operation Honor that was that I was reprimanded for and minimized. that led to the fact that nobody else had reported this in Operation Honor, only I did.
Okay, and thank you, Madam Chair. If there's any time, I'll share it with Mrs. Ellison. And who else has access to that reporting system besides you? You said it's compartmentalized. Can each individual who logs into it only see what he or she logs into it, or can people see what other people log into?
So the way the system is designed, from what I understand, and again, there's probably people that can better explain it. I have to sign in using my public key infrastructure card, and it's then authenticated. Now, I can only see investigations or complaints that have to do with my unit. Now, I may also be able to view something, say if there's a respondent in another unit, say in like at CFB Halifax, I wouldn't be able to see their file, but I could potentially see that, respondent, pending on postings or something like that. But it's not like I can look into another unit's files.
So your unit, and then whoever is commanding various units, would the person higher above be able to log in to any of your, not maybe you don't know, but conceivably could somebody use one of those cards to log in and see what's happening in every unit underneath them?
So there are designated Operation OPTAS users. So there's the unit users. And then there's the L2, so the regional commander on this coast, and then the L1, which is the Navy. They have designated users as well, and yes, they can see what's under their purview. So because they need to be able to control the information flow and how and brief commanders on how files are progressing. And for analytics. Now, you can't simply just take one of these cards and pop it into the system. There's additional verification factors that go along with those cards. So you can't just grab one and pop it in the system and away you go.
And do you know if there are any audits done? Can somebody track who else is logged into the different parts of the database? There must be some auditing reporting system as well to check and see who's logged on and looked.
That's well above my pay grade to answer that question, ma'am.
The agency who is responsible for that database, is that the CFNIS? Is it the military police? Who's in charge of that? Who is responsible for maintaining that and its integrity?
So from what I understand, the ultimate report and analytics database is at the L0 at the Chief of Defense Staff Office. It's then delegated to each L1 to have their own system, and then further delegated to the L2s. So ultimately, it's the Chief of Defense Staff.
All right, thank you very much. On to Madame Vanderbilt, please.
Yes, I'll be very short. Just a small comment to the committee regarding the issue of Ms. Armstrong. She is, in fact, the Chief of Staff to the Departmental Assistant, which is under the Deputy Minister. And it is typical in this committee that the Deputy Minister would come here and speak for departmental staff. And we're very fortunate that in a few minutes we will have the Deputy Minister. So I would imagine that those questions could potentially be posed to her. And I just, finally, to Lieutenant Commander Trotter, I just want to say that you are exemplary of the best of the Canadian Armed Forces. Your testimony today is very, very courageous. And I just, on behalf of, I think, all members of this committee, I want to thank you very, very much for being an ally and for your service and for coming here today. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right, and I am just going to reiterate what Madame and most of the members here have said, their thanks for your courage that you took to come here and your commitment to making the Canadian Forces an even better place to work, Lieutenant Commander. We very much appreciate it. And if there's no objections, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Back into order. As we resume the meeting, the committee is continuing its study of addressing sexual misconduct issues in the Canadian Armed Forces, including the allegations against former Chief of the Defence Staff, Jonathan Vance. With us today by video conference for the last 2 hours, the Honourable Harjit Sajjan, Minister of National Defence, from the Department of National Defence, Jody Thomas, Deputy Minister, and Rear Admiral Geneviève Bernatchez, Judge Advocate General of the Canadian Armed Forces. 10 minutes will be given for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. So, welcome, Minister Harjit Sajjan. I now invite you to make an opening statement of up to 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, I want to thank the committee for inviting me back for this 2-hour session. There are points that I hope that all members in this committee agree upon. Sexual misconduct and harassment are unacceptable. They're not acceptable in Canadian society. They're not acceptable in the Parliament of Canada. And they're definitely not acceptable in the Canadian Armed Forces or the Department of National Defence. We want to prevent it, and we want to make sure that survivors and we support their network. We want to ensure that those who come forward feel safe and confident when sexual misconduct and harassment are reported and investigated. Eliminating all forms of misconduct, abuse of power, and creating a safe work environment for everyone in the defense team has always been my top priority as Minister of National Defense. However, recent media reports show that still too many members of the Canadian Armed Forces do not feel safe to come forward. And I want to be clear that I had no knowledge of these allegations before they were reported. We know that we must do more to make sure that every Canadian Armed Forces member feels safe to come forward, and that we will be ready to support them if they do. I spent my lifetime serving Canadians as a police detective, as a Canadian who served in uniform, and as a member of Parliament. I know that perpetrators must be held accountable. I know that any organization, including the Canadian Armed Forces, must work hard to eliminate toxic masculinity that creates an unacceptable culture. We have taken action to change this culture of toxic masculinity and to tackle sexual misconduct in the Canadian Armed Forces. But we have more work to do, and every option is on the table. We owe it to our members and to Canadians to get this right. As I stated previously, I disagree with parts of Mr. Walburn's testimony concerning our meeting in 2018. And last week, the former ombudsman presented his version of the facts. In my previous testimony, I wanted to respect the confidential nature of my meetings with the former ombudsman. But in light of his testimony, there are issues I need to get set straight. I did meet with Mr. Walburn on March 1st. At the end of a regular meeting with staff, Mr. Walburn asked to meet alone. And the majority of this private meeting did not concern General Vance. Rather, in this private meeting, Mr. Walburn spent the majority of his time focused on the investigation into claims of misconduct involving himself and his office. As I have said before, any investigation needs to run its course, no matter the rank, no matter the position of those involved. It must be free of political interference. That also applied to the investigation of the Ombudsman's office, as I told him at that time. Politicians inserting themselves into an investigation is wrong. At the very end of this private conversation, Mr. Walburn brought up concerns of misconduct involving the former Chief of Defence Staff. He did not give me any details. I did not allow him to give me any details. I very purposely respected the investigative process to ensure that it remained independent. Drawing an elected official, a politician, into the sequence of an investigation would have been wrong and dangerous. Politicizing any investigation that threatens a just outcome for those who come forward Given his position and experience, Mr. Walburn should have known this. In our society, the last thing we want is for elected politicians to make decisions that investigators need to make independently. In Mr. Walburn's testimony, he stated that he came to me for advice on what to do. I advised him exactly what to do. I said that Mr. Walburn should use the already existing powers and processes to address the complaint. As Mr. Walburn stated in his testimony, he knew the powers he had as an ombudsman. Now, according to the directives that govern his office, in matters involving a potential criminal act or breach of code of service discipline, the ombudsman can report these complaints to the Judge Advocate General, the Provost Marshal, or the Military Police Complaints Commission. And to my knowledge, Mr. Walburn did not take these complaints to any of these bodies. I provided the advice that Mr. Walburn said that he sought. Investigations into complaints like this, like this, should start with proper investigative authority, not with an elected official. To provide Mr. Walburn with additional support, senior officials in the Privy Council office were informed of the complaint regarding the former Chief of Defense Staff. By Mr. Walburn's own admission, he was asked to provide details regarding this complaint to those appropriate authorities the very next day. But unfortunately, he did not do so. Mr. Walburn said that he sought top cover to show the complainant that we took this allegation seriously. Well, Madam Chair, it is because I took this concern so seriously, as I would with any allegations of misconduct, that I raised it to the appropriate independent authority outside of the Department of National Defense and the Canadian Armed Forces. Mr. Walburn suggested that if he had received feedback, he would have gone back to the complainant to see if they would provide specific information. We did, in fact, provide that feedback. At no time, according to Mr. Walburn's testimony, did he say he went back to the complainant to ask if they were willing to make a formal complaint following his meeting with these senior officials. I've learned that at no time did the appropriate authorities receive information. Finally, Mr. Walburn stated that there was no follow-up. That is not true. Senior officials followed up. Actionable information was asked for. Information was not shared. At the core of our democratic and justice systems, at its very heart, is the belief that any investigation into potential wrongdoing should never come under the sway of political influence. Being involved can prejudice a just outcome for those who come forward. When any concerns or allegations are brought to my attention, I have always followed the proper processes. I would never want to be the reason why somebody who came forward did not get the just outcome that they deserve. As for the suggestion that the Board of Inquiry or summary investigation would be the appropriate venue, that suggestion is absolutely wrong. In fact, under the Defense Administrative Orders and directives into boards of inquiry and summary investigations, we are prohibited from using a board of inquiry or summary investigation to seek evidence related to a potential breach of the Code of Service Discipline or assign criminal responsibility. Madam Chair, let me quote Article 2.7 from Directive 7002-0. I quote, "A board of inquiry or a summary investigation must not be conducted if any purpose of the board of inquiry or summary investigation is to A, obtain evidence relating to a potential breach of the Code of Service Discipline, or assign criminal responsibility. Also, the Board of Inquiry is prohibited from recommending that a charge be laid." These are critical points. When individuals come forward, they rightfully expect that their complaints will be acted upon while respecting their wishes. And if warranted, the appropriate charges should be laid under either the Code of Service Discipline or criminal charges. Any interference in this process, which is what has been suggested, puts into jeopardy a just outcome. That would mean a complainant, a survivor, could be denied the just outcome they deserve. That is why it would have been extremely inappropriate and damaging to discuss any allegation with General Vance. A just outcome is what those who come forward deserve. An outcome that Canadians, including Canadian Armed Forces members, expect. An outcome our society needs. An outcome that I and our entire government want. We have processes to investigate regardless of the rank or position of the person involved. But despite the cries from some of the members, investigations should not be politicized. Not by a minister, not by any political office. Any investigation should be conducted independently by the relevant and appropriate authorities. This is a fundamental part of our justice system, a principle some of the members seem to forget. I've always insisted that we have more work to do to ensure that any member of the Canadian Armed Forces feels safe to come forward. Though we have made meaningful progress, we need to accelerate these changes. We need a complete and total culture change. We need to improve our policies and processes to prevent misconduct and to prevent abuses of power. It is why we are moving forward with an independent external review to ensure we can comprehensively address the fact that members still do not feel safe to come forward. And as we have said, we will be moving forward with an independent reporting structure to look at allegations of misconduct. And all options are on the table. We will do everything possible to rebuild the confidence we have lost for those who have experienced misconduct. We're focused on doing everything possible to prevent and eliminate sexual misconduct from the Canadian Armed Forces. We will have a complete and total culture change. We will eliminate the culture of toxic masculinity that still exists. We will make sure that those who have experienced misconduct feel safe and supported if and when they come forward. And we will build a more inclusive Canadian Armed Forces that better reflects and represents the Canadians that they protect each and every day. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Thank you very much. On to Mr. Bazan, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Minister, I'm glad you're at committee. You seem to have a changing story of exactly what happened with these allegations against General Vance. In your opening statement, you failed to acknowledge that the victim's wishes in this was to keep it confidential, and she was not prepared to give the ombudsman the ability to go forward with the claim until she knew that there was a way to protect her. And you know, Minister, you failed to recognize this in your opening statement, that the Chief of Defense Staff has control over the entire armed forces and only answers to you as the Minister of National Defense. So you ignored the chain of command impact here and how that would skew her ability, the victim's ability to come forward with her story. Or, you know, the ombudsman, the former ombudsman, Gary Walborn, his superior was yourself as well, Minister. And so he had to get direction from you, which didn't occur. So I just wanted to confirm the facts here, because what you said on February 19th is different than what you're saying today. So did you meet with Gary Walborn on March the 1st, 2018? Yes or no?
Madam Chair, as I stated, I did in my statement meet with the ombudsman. However, to address the member's comments that he just made, it is absolutely inappropriate for any elected official
Minister,
to be part of an investigation.
We're not buying that. You are the minister. You're sworn an oath to be the minister and to manage under the National Defense Act, manage the Department of National Defense and the Canadian Armed Forces. Minister, did Gary Walborn address the issue of sexual misconduct allegations against General Vance on the March 1st, 2018 meeting?
Madam Chair, as I stated, after a formal meeting with our staff present, the ombudsman asked me to meet with him alone, which I agreed. And majority of the discussion usually was about the investigation into him and his office.
Instead
After the conclusion of
Barry
that,
Walborn, will you please just answer the question? Did he raise the issue of sexual misconduct?
Madam Chair, I'm trying to address. He asked about the meeting, and I'm trying to address what the meeting was and to properly explain what has taken place. And what I'm here to tell you that at the end of that meeting, Mr. Walborn raised concerns about the former chief of defense staff. And that is when I told him that, no, I cannot be involved in investigation. It is improper for any politician to be part of the investigation.
Well,
more importantly,
there's an impossibility for an independent investigation to happen within the Department of National Defense when everybody reports up to the chief of defense staff. So when he tried to raise this and present you with the evidence, what did you do with that information on March the 1st, 2018?
With all due respect, Madam Chair, the member is missing a point here. When a complaint is received by the ombudsman, investigation automatically starts. And because of that, no politician, including myself, should ever be put in that position. That information should have gone to the appropriate authorities. As I stated, there are many options that is actually in his own guidance, and he stated that he does know his job, where he could have gone to the Judge Advocate General, the Provost Marshal, or the Independent Military Police Complaints Commission. That did not happen. What I didn't want to do, Madam Chair, is to undermine the just outcome possibly by myself getting involved into an investigation. That is absolutely wrong. No, you have.
We want to know.
I'm trying to answer the question, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'm trying to answer the question here. I was trying to protect the integrity of the investigation, the person that has come forward. If you raise any concerns, if anybody raises a concern regarding the chief of defense staff, it has to be taken seriously. And that is exactly what I did, making sure that myself as a politician, elected official, was not involved in the investigation, that it was directed to the appropriate authorities, in this case, Privy Council, so that the allegation can be looked at. And if he needed greater advice, to actually get it from the appropriate people. That's how seriously we took this, because we needed to make sure that the appropriate
answer the tough questions.
No, you're not understanding,
I
Madam
understand
Chair.
quite well. I believe that I understand exactly what happened. It's been widely reported on. I've read the National Defense Act. I've been on this file for quite some time, and I understand how the department works and what your responsibilities are, and that you're failing to do it. So again, you talk about not wanting to do any information, but we know that PCO did get this information. So who did you tell about the allegations of sexual misconduct against General Vance after that meeting on March the 1st?
As I stated, I didn't accept the information from the ombudsman, but however, the advice that he said that I did not, he came for advice. I gave him the advice, exactly who we needed to go to. And to make sure, I went back to my office, got in touch with my chief of staff to making sure that the appropriate authorities, in this case, PCO, was informed of this. And in his own testimony, it was confirmed that they followed up with him immediately on this matter.
Madam Chair, through you to the minister. So you gave the information, handed it off to the PCO. PCO actually wrote a memo on March 16th, clearly outlined that the ombudsman doesn't have the power to investigate sexual misconduct. We also know from testimony here that the ombudsman asked to meet with you 7 more times after March the 1st, and you refused. Why?
Madam Chair, as I just stated, by myself meeting about this is interference in an investigation.
Investigation hadn't started.
The ombudsman, with all due respect, Madam Chair, to the member, when an ombudsman receives a complaint, the process has started. It is the job of the ombudsman to conduct those investigations. And I didn't want to be put into a position where I potentially have interfered with an investigation.
Okay.
He doesn't have the power to carry it out.
Stand by. All right, that's enough now. We have to try and respect each other's opportunity to ask questions and answer accordingly. And we're making the life of the interpreters challenging as well. So thank you very much. On to Mr. Spengeman, please.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. And Minister, thank you for being with us again today and providing us with your testimony. I have a couple of quick questions at the outset. Minister, I think you'll be aware that your former Chief of Staff has also been invited to appear at this committee. And I'm wondering if you would think that she would have anything to add beyond the testimony that you've given or are about to give.
Sorry, I was on mute. Madam Chair, as you know, after the Ombudsman spoke to me, I informed my Chief of Staff so that she could follow up with the appropriate individuals within the Privy Council, as she did. She also informed Elder Marquis at the Prime Minister's office. And I'm here today to provide you with my testimony on this, but also on behalf of my staff involved in this matter.
Minister, thank you. And what about Elder Marquez? Would he have anything further to add beyond your testimony?
Madam Chair, as I have said, my Chief of Staff at the time informed PMO that what was transpiring, and there would be nothing further for him to add.
Minister, I want to thank you for your strong position on the issue, your openness to considering all options, and your recognition of the need to rebuild trust fundamentally. I certainly won't want to profess to speak for any of my colleagues individually, but I have a sense that as a whole, the committee is strongly aligned with your recognition for the need of change within the Canadian Armed Forces on the issue of sexual misconduct. Minister, women join the Canadian Armed Forces in order to serve, and many of them will have been proud to be following in the traditions of their families from generations before them. But because of the systemic nature of this issue of sexual misconduct, there's a high risk that they will be met with abusive, dehumanizing, and degrading behavior, and then with a feeling that they have nowhere to turn. And I would like to ask you, Minister, what is being done at the moment to empower survivors of sexual misconduct to come forward, and equally to empower those to come forward who see a duty to report or who may want to come forward because they no longer accept this culture of sexual misconduct?
Madam Chair, thank you very much for that question. This is something that we have taken heart from day one, to making sure that everybody that joins the Canadian Armed Forces, especially women, so they can have an inclusive environment to serve, so they can reach the full potential and ultimately give that potential to the Canadian Armed Forces. And through our conversations that we've been having about processing stuff, I think what we haven't been discussing much are the women that have actually come forward, and the courage that it has taken. And more work needs to be done. What we have done is changing policies in place to making sure that people will be held to account. The military police have a special unit that's now designed to investigate situations, sexual misconduct like this. We've also passed the Declaration of Victims' Rights Bill C-77, to making sure that they have the appropriate support. But most importantly, Madam Chair, I think the most important thing out of this is we need greater representation at all senior levels. And that's something that I've been focused on from day one, to create a pipeline where more women can come to the senior levels. When I became Minister of National Defense, we had 6 female general officers. And today we have 14. And we need to grow that number even still. Because we know once we have more women and increase our numbers, and more importantly, in senior meaningful positions, culture change will happen, because women will be at the table.
Minister, thank you very much for that. I'm wondering if I could ask you just to follow up on the issue of culture. And you called for total culture change. And the committee in this parliament and the previous one has heard a lot of testimony about culture, in part about toxic masculinity and sexual misconduct and negative aspects, but also positive aspects, the culture of excellence, of discipline, the culture that goes with a chain of command and with deployability in very challenging circumstances, and working with our friends and allies overseas and serving the Canadian public as the Canadian Forces did so admirably during the COVID-19 pandemic. Can you unpack the idea of total culture change as you see it, focusing presumably on the negative elements, but also how that intersects with positive aspects of culture that are present in the Canadian Forces today and should be preserved?
Madam Chair, thank you very much for that question. When it comes to the total culture change, and I have received this question quite often, and for me, it's about making sure that we eliminate the poisonous pieces of that we are currently dealing with in the Canadian Armed Forces with all type of misconduct. And the culture change that we're talking about is very simple. It's to allow everybody who joins, to allow them to reach their full potential in the Canadian Armed Forces in an inclusive environment. And to be able to, when there is any type of wrongdoing, that they can come forward, that things can change, that they will be heard, and more importantly, that they can have a just outcome. That's what we've been have been focusing on. We know that we have a lot more work to do, that where we have women who felt that they could not come forward. And this is probably the most disturbing piece out of this. And we need to do more on this. And I look forward to hearing as much advice. We will be taking greater action on this so that we can create that culture change that is needed.
And Minister, in the 30 seconds I have left, what would you say to a young woman today who is contemplating a career in the Canadian Forces?
My message to them is that you and every other Canadian citizen have a right to serve in the Canadian Armed Forces, a right to wear that uniform, but to come in and to be able to treat it with dignity and respect. And that's exactly what we're doing. But more importantly, to be able to create that pipeline so they have an opportunity to be able to reach the highest ranks. Madam Chair, we've had women in the Canadian Armed Forces for some time. They never reached the highest levels. Well, this is one of the things that we wanted to change, and we have. Making sure that we create a pipeline from the bottom up that, by the way, that cannot be reversed, regardless of government or ministers that come into these positions. Because we know by having them at the table, we can actually start creating that culture change directly.
All right, thank you. On to Monsieur Fortin, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Fortin, please. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Minister, the message that you're just sending us is that for women who want to get involved in national defense, that's a great message. But don't you think that if in the same breath you're saying that they might fall victim to sexual harassment, and that if they make a complaint with the ombudsman, if this harassment comes from the highest rank, the chief of defense staff, well, the ombudsman can't do anything, and you as a minister can't do anything other than tell the ombudsman, take care of business yourself, go see the appropriate authorities. Do you think she'll be reassured by that?
Madam Chair, I think the member is missing one point in this. The ombudsman role is to investigate and deal with things.
No, Mr. Minister, I don't want a course. I'm asking you a question. Do you think that she will be reassured?
You don't. Pensez-vous que la dame va...
Do you think that she'll be reassured?
Yes or no?
No, let me answer the question.
No, that's what I thought. Mr. Minister, Mr. Fortin.
Up this. If we're going to ask a question, s'il vous plaît.
Please. Now ask your question. I have 5 minutes, but the minister gave a 10-minute presentation before, and I don't want him to... Earlier, you said that on March 1st, Mr. Walborn said there was a sexual complaint against the Chief of Defense Staff. That's not nothing. The Ombudsman was in a difficult position. He didn't know exactly how to deal with the problem, and he asked for your advice. You told us that you said that don't bother me. Don't seek advice on what you need to do. That's what you told him to go see the Provost Marshal, the Military Police Complaints Commission, and he left. And then, did you check with those bodies to see whether the complaint made it to them? Did the Provost Marshal or the Independent Military Police, did they receive information from the Ombudsman? Did you conduct checks to follow up?
Madam Chair, first of all, the Ombudsman is to investigate regardless and be independent of the chain of command, regardless of the rank. And to answer your question directly about follow-up, absolutely not. That's called interference in an investigation by myself involving. If you're asking me to interfere in an investigation, I will tell you straight, I'm absolutely no.
No, Mr.
Mr. Minister, that's not what we're asking you. I am not accusing you of interfering, in my opinion. You didn't intervene enough, but the Ombudsman told you there was a problem. You told him, go see 3 other bodies. the provost marshal and so on and so forth, but you conducted no follow-up. Did you ask after the ombudsman afterwards? But you said, Mr. Minister, don't you think it's significant that what the ombudsman was telling you about the chief of defense staff? Don't you think it's important?
Absolutely, it was important, Madam Chair.
Mais pourquoi n'avez-vous
But why did you do no follow-up?
answer my question? If I'm trying to answer, so can I answer the question or not?
The question is, qu'est-ce que vous avez
What did you do? Why didn't you intervene?
Madam Chair, okay, I cannot intervene because
Okay.
it would be obstruction of an investigation. No politician should do that. If you want to do something like that, that is your prerogative. I can assure you, I will not. You cannot. I'm trying to tell you.
But you can't solve the problem, but
I'll be able to explain this a little bit better if you give me the opportunity. Because this is important. Those things that I pointed out is not just me. Those are the directives given to an ombudsman office that was created when the office was created. If an allegation comes in, it's in those directives of where the ombudsman can go for that advice.
But the ombudsman was asking you. He said to you, Mr. Minister, yes, but the ombudsman said, I'm in a difficult situation, Mr. Minister. I don't know how to do my work because we're talking about the chief of defense staff. It's a difficult position. He asked you for advice, and you were the minister. You were the only superior to the chief of defense staff. And what I understand is that you didn't help him. Did you at least try to talk to him about it again? Did you try to find a solution?
I gave him the direct advice, which was to go to the appropriate authorities, in this case here, Privy Council office, who's in charge of governor and council appointments. And in his own testimony, they followed up immediately the next day. And Madam Chair, it's extremely important to look at those directives that an ombudsman must comply with. You should not have to come for me for advice. It's the ombudsman job and role to give the minister advice.
How many times, Mr. Minister, in your opinion, did it happen that the chief of defense staff has been subject to a complaint for sexual harassment? There's been Mr. Vance and Mr. McDonald, but before that, has it occurred?
I don't know, because investigations are supposed to be done independent of elected officials.
All right, thank you very much.
And you're not surprised?
On to Mr. Garrison, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I thank the Minister for being here today. And let me reassure him that the answer to any questions I ask today will not be something about what the Ombudsman did or did not do. The committee is seeking accountability for what the government did or did not do to make sure that women can serve equally in the Canadian Armed Forces. So we have made some progress in these hearings that we've held, because we do know today that in 2018, both you, Mr. Minister, and the Prime Minister knew that there were allegations of sexual misconduct against the Chief of Defense Staff, and neither of you took any effective action on those allegations. So you're telling us today that your reason for not taking action was because you referred the complaint to the appropriate independent investigating authority. Mr. Minister, do you seriously think that we will accept that the Privy Council office, which reports to the Prime Minister and has no investigative capacity whatsoever on its staff, was in any way an appropriate investigating authority?
Mr. Garrison, sorry, Madam Chair, through you, that as I stated, the Ombudsman is independent of the chain of command to conduct investigations. And in this case here, had in his own, the directives to the Ombudsman has the option to where they need to get the appropriate advice. In this case here, the information was passed to PCO for the one very important reason that we took this very seriously, because governor and council appointments are conducted at PCO. And they followed up with him the very next day to give any further advice that might be needed by the appropriate people who deal with governor and council appointments. Having said this, absolutely not is it's inappropriate for any of us to be involved in any investigation.
But the Privy Council office is neither an investigating authority nor independent. That's the key point here. I guess I want to turn to the part of Mr. Walborn's testimony that you have actually confirmed today, and that is that you refused to look at the evidence that he was presenting on the accusations of a serious sexual misconduct against the Chief of Defense Staff. So you refused to look at that information. I've tried for the life of me to figure out why you would not look at that. There was no investigation taking place at that time. So what could the possible reasons be? And I'm going to suggest there are two possible reasons. One is that you didn't want to see the evidence of misconduct against General Vance because you have a long personal and professional and career relationship with the general. The second possibility is that you did not want to see the evidence because, as Major Brennan has told the media, knowledge of General Vance's sexual misconduct allegations were widespread among the senior leadership. So did you not want to see this evidence because you were afraid you knew what was there?
Madam Chair, let me answer this very directly. Please do not allow any other member to define my experience or my service in the Canadian Armed Forces. And I don't like other men telling me what my experience was like. And I can assure you, and I'm sorry to get angry about this, that I would go after anybody regardless of rank or position if allegations brought forward. The reason, and you say the investigation not started, I disagree. When an ombudsman receives a complaint, the process has started. For me to accept any information at that time is interference in the investigation. I'm sorry, Madam Chair. Please don't have this member to define my experience in the Canadian Armed Forces or what it was like. Because I would not do it for what happened in your life either, okay? I'm sorry. I've had many people, many white men trying to tell me what my experience is. And right now I want to talk about the women and what better we can do for them. So please don't do that, Mr. Garrison, to me.
Well, Mr. Minister, I said nothing about your honorable service in the Canadian Forces. Nothing whatsoever. What I'm asking you about today.
You said that I was hiding something because of service. Please don't do that. Because don't define my experience in the Canadian Armed Forces. Not because of service. You have no idea what my life was in the Canadian Armed Forces. Thank you.
Well, with respect, Mr. Minister, I'm asking about why you did not look at the evidence. And you haven't given us no reason for not looking at the evidence other than to continue to spin this line about the ombudsman. It is not true that once the ombudsman gets a complaint, he starts an investigation. That's simply not a fact. Ombudsmen quite often do not investigate things that come to their office because they don't have the authority.
How? Please explain. If you can explain how that's supposed to work.
If they don't have the authority, then they do not investigate. How
the ombudsman has the ability then to go, as I stated, in their own directives that's given to them when the ombudsman office was set up, to go to the judge advocate general for advice, who can give advice, to go to the provost marshal. Nowhere does it say the minister of national defense, for a very good reason, because no politician should ever be part of an investigation. If I can assure you, having involved in any investigation, I don't know what the information was, nor should I, because I don't know what it is. If I take a chance, there's an actual chance where I might inadvertently make a mistake and disrupt the just cause that might come from that. I'm sorry. When it comes to investigations, I haven't conducted investigations. And I made that call at that time, and it was a right call not to intervene with an investigation, but making sure that it was followed up by the appropriate authorities.
Well, with respect, Mr. Minister, the Defense Act does give you the responsibility. And you say that you couldn't use a board of inquiry because it would have involved potential criminal charges or potential code of service violations. But when you hadn't looked at the information, you couldn't possibly have known that. The only way you could know that that was not a course of action open to you was to have actually considered the evidence, not to investigate the evidence, but considered the evidence that the ombudsman tried to present to you because he did not have the authority to proceed further.
With all due respect, Mr. Garrison, there was many options for the ombudsman available, and more importantly, as it was when it was passed on to PCO for the appropriate people to give the appropriate advice, would have told him there's many things that could have been done. And I'm not here to speculate. What I can only do is to making sure that any allegation that comes forward, it is immediately looked at. And that's exactly what we did, Mr. Garrison, because I can assure you for one thing, I don't care about the position or the rank of any individual. I care about the people who have been impacted. And I want to make sure that they get the just outcome. And this is why, when I was serving, was my focus. when I was serving in the police, and why right now, as Minister of National Defense, has been my number one priority from day one. When we put people as chapter number 1 of the defense policy, the reason that was done was focused on this, that to tell the entire chain of command, the entire structure, that everything that you do must be focused on them. The change in policy, the resources, and how do you root this behavior out? But here's the thing though, Ms. Gears, I know how much you care. And I've seen the passion that you have, but you also know my passion as well, that we want to improve our processes. We have a lot more work to do.
All right,
and
thank
we will
you very much. Okay, on to Madame Ellsliff, please.
Thank you very much. Minister, who does the CDS report to?
The Chief of Defense Staff reports to myself as Minister of National Defense.
And who does the Ombudsman report to?
The Ombudsman provides reports to me.
And who do military members deserve a Chief of the Defense Staff who behaves in accordance with the Code of Service Discipline?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Who is legally accountable to ensure that the CDS behaves in accordance with the Code of Service Discipline?
You can't, Madam Chair, when it comes to allegations, as a Minister of National Defense, I do not investigate.
No,
they need to
but
go to
who
the
is
appropriate
ultimately
authorities.
accountable? Who do we look to make sure the Chief of Defense Staff behaves in accordance with the Code of Service Discipline?
My job is to making sure that everybody.
Did you direct the Ombudsman to investigate the allegations that he brought to you?
Madam Chair, as I stated before, when the information was brought forward, as I stated, one, I could not hear it. However, I gave very clear advice exactly what needed to be done.
Not advice, Minister. Did you or did you not direct the Ombudsman to investigate?
Madam Chair, as I stated, I cannot direct in an investigation. That would be political interference.
You can. The Prime Minister?
Actually, you cannot.
The Prime Minister on March 10th in the House of Commons said that the minister, directed the Ombudsman to independent officials who could investigate. Is that true?
Madam Chair, the information was provided to PCO officials because they're in charge of governing council appointments. That is very important.
In your mind, Minister, who was charged, responsible for investigating this allegation?
The appropriate authorities only can investigate, Madam Chair.
And who are the appropriate authorities to investigate allegations against the Code of Service Discipline of the Chief of the Defense Staff?
It would be the military, police, the NIS, or if it occurs outside, when it comes to
whose responsibility is it to make sure they know to investigate?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question, please?
Who tells them to investigate? Who makes them aware so they know to investigate?
Madam Chair, I do not direct or inform in any type of investigation. I cannot. It's called, that would be political interference.
Minister, the RCMP were called in to investigate Admiral Norman, and he was suspended when a file was created by the RCMP. Charges were laid, and they were tried publicly in court, Admiral Norman. Can we expect the same process to hold true for General Vance? Or is 20 years of alleged sexual oppression and abuse of authority not as serious an offense as allegedly leaking shipbuilding procurement documents?
Madam Chair, when it comes to the investigation of Admiral Norman, that was, again, done absolutely independent of our office. And in this case here, it will be done independent of our office.
It will be done by whom, Minister? By whom will it be done? And whose authority and responsibility is it to ensure that it gets done?
The military police in this, depends on the allegation. Did you follow up
with the military police to make sure that the investigation was ongoing?
Madam Chair,
did you follow up with anyone to ensure that the investigation was completed?
With all due respect, Madam Chair,
point of order,
I cannot interfere.
Point of order.
Stand by.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam Chair.
Madam Chair.
I want to have the answer from the minister and not from the member. Please be polite and let the minister talk. Thank you.
All right, Madame Alislev, continue.
I will ask my question again. Minister, who did you follow up with to ensure that the investigation was underway of the Chief of the Defense Staff so that you could take appropriate disciplinary action if that was required?
Madam Chair, as a Minister of National Defense, I do not follow up because that is interference in an investigation.
By law, you are accountable to make sure the Chief of the Defense Staff is behaving in accordance with the Code of Service Discipline. So how do you do that if you don't have the information, follow up on it, and ensure that military members can serve with a CDS who is in accordance with the law?
Madam Chair, I'm not supposed to get that information. That would be inappropriate.
Is it against the Code of Service Discipline for a senior officer?
Time is up. On to Mr. Baker, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for Minister for being here today. I just wanted to share something, Minister, to follow up on what you were saying to Mr. Garrison. You have, I've spent some time studying your career. That I know that you have spent your career protecting people as a Vancouver detective, as a leader in the Canadian Armed Forces. And I know from the actions that you've taken, you've spoken to some of them here today. I know how committed you are to ensuring that all equity-seeking groups, including women, feel safe and protected. So I wanted to thank you for that service, and I wanted to voice my confidence in your work in that regard. I also wanted to correct the record. I think Mr. Garrison indicated that the Prime Minister knew of allegations, and there has been no evidence presented to this committee of that at all. And I think that's highly inappropriate for Mr. Garrison to suggest something of the sort. And I also want to ask you a question, Minister. So in a tweet from Mercedes Stevenson on March 3rd, 2021, and I quote, "The evidence that the former military ombudsman is referring to, it is not an allegation of sexual assault. It is the email chain between the then CDS and a then corporal where he allegedly proposed going to a clothing optional vacation destination," close quote. So can you confirm, Minister, that what the ombudsman tried to show you was not what Kelly Brennan came forward with?
Madam Chair, I don't know the information that was brought forward because it would have been inappropriate for me to even accept it. It would have been interference in the actual process. My goal at this time, any allegation that comes forward, if a chief of defense staff is even mentioned, is to immediately take it extremely seriously, to making sure that it goes to the appropriate authorities for a proper investigation. And that is exactly what we have done. And I've said this a number of times, and even in previous years, that regardless of rank, regardless of position, that we will take every allegation seriously.
Thank you, Minister. We heard from the Ombudsman during his testimony that he was reached out to by the Privy Council office the very day after he raised his concerns with you. Can we assume from that you took immediate action?
Absolutely. This is where, one, the advice that I gave directly back to the former Ombudsman, but also the reason I had my staff immediately contact PCO is because that's where the governor and council appointments are managed, and to making sure that they knew, and then if there were any other mechanisms that they had, they can provide the appropriate advice and also look at the allegation. But it was my understanding that no information was provided.
And Minister, I know you've spoken to this, but I think this is important to underline. So I'm going to ask you this question. We've heard from during our committee hearings, from witnesses, from the Ombudsman himself, that you could have done a board of inquiry. Could you please explain why you didn't go that route? I think it's really important that people and the public watching understand that.
Madam Chair, I think this is a really important point because there are powers that as ministers of national defense have, but within those powers, they have to be regulated in a certain way because we're in a rule of law country. As I already stated in my statement, the reasons why, but I think it'd be more appropriate if I have the JAG answer that question in more detail.
Bonjour, Madame la Présidente.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair.
Hello, Madam Chair.
May I proceed?
Merci. So first, I would like to. (7-2) dealing with boards of inquiry, that it provides at paragraph 2.7 that a board of inquiry must not be conducted if any purpose of the board of inquiry is to obtain evidence relating to a potential breach of the Code of Service Discipline or to assign criminal responsibility. The reason why this is because any allegation must be handled carefully and in a manner that preserves the ability to conduct a fair and independent disciplinary or criminal investigation. And if charges are laid, to have those charges prosecuted and tried fairly and in a manner that respects the right of both the accused and the victim. Thank you, Madam President.
All right, thank you very much. Monsieur Fortin, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, what I've remembered from your evidence is that
Donc, vous n'avez pas fait de suivi, mais vous nous dites.
So you didn't do any follow-up, but you're also saying that the following morning.
Je comprends que vous avez demandé à vos.
So I understand that you asked your chief of staff or someone in your staff to contact the Privy Council to inform them of the situation. So we're moving forward, and thank you. So at that point, Minister, did you call back the Privy Council office to, or did you ask your chief of staff to call back to see where that investigation, what stage it was at?
Madam Chair, I did ask to making sure that making sure the connection was made, but we also had to make sure that we stayed out of any type of investigation, the asking too many questions to allow the process to take its course, and that's extremely important. So over time, I do remember asking a number of questions of where things were at, but I also knew at the same time they did have the information and that it was being looked at and taken seriously.
Est-ce que fois à partir de mars 2018,
From March 2018, so Mr. Walt talked to you on March 1st, and then the next day there's a call with the Privy Council office. From that point on, how many times did you talk to someone from the Privy Council office to get information on the management of this complaint?
Madam Chair, when the information, once it was confirmed that it was the Privy Council office had it, this is where I had greater faith that a proper process would take its course. I mean, over a number of months, I believe I asked a number of times, but I don't actually have the exact number of how many times I would have asked that question. But what I did know that that they did had it and it was being followed up.
Okay. Du 1er mars 2018 aller jusqu'à.
From March 1st, 2018 until very recently, we hadn't heard about this. Were you not concerned to know that the chief of staff had been the object of a complaint on March 1st, 2018, that there had been a complaint against him then, and then that it was the end of 2020 and we still hadn't heard about it? Didn't that concern you?
Madam Chair, any allegation is deeply concerning. And this is one of the reasons why we had to immediately making sure that the appropriate process was actually followed here. And then later on, I was advised that there was nothing more that have come from it. And and this is one thing that regardless, I can only take action based on the information and a process, the proper process that's taking its course. In this case here, something was followed.
I'm afraid, Monsieur Fortin. On
Madame
to
la
Mr.
Présidente, vous savez, il y a beaucoup de délais avec les traductions. Hein.
Madam Chair, there's a lot of delay with translation, and in many committees, we give a few additional seconds when questions are asked in French and the answers are in English, because the Francophone MPs are always disadvantaged with those delays. So maybe for the next turn, we could have a bit more time. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fortin.
A few extra, like a little bit more time because of the interpretation issue, but I'll pay even more attention to that. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. Okay,
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
On to Mr. Garrison, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, I want to return to saying very clearly to the Minister that I have always had the utmost respect for her service in the Canadian Forces, and in particular his service in Afghanistan. I think the Minister knows that. I'm not sure where that reaction comes from, although I have to say I did see it once before when I raised questions about his failure to order an inquiry into the transfer of Afghan detainees. But I assure you, what I'm asking about is what you did or did not do as Minister, and not about your previous service. And I raised the question about who knew what about General Vance, because I have been told literally dozens of times that General Vance's indiscretions were the worst kept secret in the Canadian military. I've actually, during the course of this hearing today, received from veterans messages conveying that once again. So it is very hard for me to accept that you knew nothing about this and that the Prime Minister knew nothing. And Mr. Baker says that there is no evidence the Prime Minister knew about these allegations. The Prime Minister said so himself in question period. He said so himself in his presser, that he knew there were allegations, he just didn't know the details. So what I want to ask you, Mr. Minister, is in addition to contacting the Privy Council office, did you or your Chief of Staff inform the Prime Minister's office of these allegations?
Madam Chair, first of all, as the Prime Minister has stated, he was informed that I have raised those concerns with the Privy Council office, but he learned of those complaints through the media. But also, Madam Chair, given the preamble that the member stated, I'm sorry. If you had any information on this, you should have reported it. I'm here to tell you that no, I did not have any other information. If at any time, any type of information was brought forward, I would always bring it to the appropriate authorities, and I always have, regardless of rank, regardless of position.
So I just want to go back to the very specific question. Did you personally raise this with the Prime Minister, or did your Chief of Staff raise it with the Prime Minister's office?
As this, Madam Chair, no politician should ever get involved in any type of investigation. The information here was given to the appropriate authorities. And that is what we need to trust. And I understand that in politics, these things go on, but I can assure you, I have always kept the people who are coming forward at the heart of everything that we do, is to making sure that we follow the proper process so that they can have the just outcome. Because the last thing you want in a case when somebody has the courage to come forward is that somebody messed up the process and that they don't get the justice that they deserve.
Well, actually,
right,
the last thing
thank you very much. On to Madame Gallant, please.
Through you, to the Minister, did you have access or request information to the Op Honor tracking system? Do you have access to it?
Madam Chair, I don't have personal access to it, but I do have regular briefings when I speak with Dr. Preston a number of times to get updates on how things are going, to see the progress, to look at the changes that need to be made, but more importantly, what are the resources that we need to provide? Because I wanted to make sure, as a Minister of National Defense, my direction is very, very clear that resources are given to the appropriate areas, places, especially when it comes to Dr. Preston, or are there any policy changes so that action and progress can continue?
Minister, you said you directed the Ombudsman to investigate the allegations against the CDS. Would you kindly provide this committee with the directive that you gave so that indicating that he should investigate?
First of all, Madam Chair, I'm not directing the Ombudsman to conduct an investigation. I advised him of where he could go for that information. In fact, it's actually clearly stated in his own the directives for what the ombudsman can do. For example, the ombudsman can get advice from the Judge Advocate General, can go to the Provost Marshal, and also can go to the Independent Police Commission. And if you'd like, I could have my JAG here to explain that information to you.
At the top of that chain of command, so it doesn't work. Who can direct
No,
the
actually, no, sorry, I just want to be explained that. No. This should be, when it says the ombudsman is actually independent of the chain of command, the chain of command also includes the Chief of Defense Staff.
Okay, so who can direct the CFNIS to open an investigation?
To see it, only they themselves can. No one should interfere with CFNIS.
So the ombudsman could not do that. He could not start an investigation into the criminal charges or criminal allegations himself. Okay, I just
but the information in the directives to the ombudsman, as information comes in, can go to the Provost Marshal, which is military police, can go to the Judge Advocate General for more advice as well. So any criminal investigation can be started by the military police when they receive information. However, the information that the ombudsman receives is the internal investigation, and then they go further out from there. But as Mr. Walburn had said, he knows his job on what needed to be done.
He sought direction from you, given the rank of this individual. So
actually, why would you ask advice from the Minister of National Defense? Because the ombudsman's job is to advise.
For direction on this, and that's
I can't give direction.
I don't want
I can't give direction on investigations.
So I do have a couple quick questions for Deputy Minister Thomas. First, for you, when did you actually serve in Afghanistan? What years? When was your deployment? Minister.
2006, 2009, and then 2010-2011.
Okay, so you were there at the same time as General Vance.
For one of the deployments, yes.
Yeah, were you friends? Did you socialize?
Madam Chair, I'm going to say this again. Please don't insinuate what my experience was.
I'm just asking if he was your friend.
Madam Chair, no, he was not my friend.
Okay, all right.
He was my boss.
Okay, for Deputy Minister Thomas, she'd understandably would have a professional relationship, a working relationship with the staff in the Prime Minister's office. I'm wondering which members of the Prime Minister's office she might have a more personal relationship with, above and beyond what the normal professional working relationship would be.
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. I wouldn't characterize my relationship with any members of the Prime Minister's office as a friendship or anything beyond a working relationship.
Okay, so it's been put on the record that you had the information at some point on the allegations against the Chief of Defense Staff on either a professional or personal level. When did you share the allegations that Mr. Walburn relayed against the CDS with the people in the PMO?
Madam Chair, I was not involved in that information flow. I did not provide allegations or information to the Prime Minister's office about this particular situation.
Minister Thomas asked for the envelope from the minister, the envelope that the ombudsman was supposedly or had supposedly given to the minister. So I'm asking, to what envelope was she referring? Or maybe, Deputy Minister, you could tell the committee what envelope that he had brought in during that meeting on March 1st, or maybe subsequently, that related to the allegations against the Chief of Defense Staff.
Madam Chair, I was not at that meeting on March 1st. I don't know what envelope is being referred to.
All right, thank you very much. Time is up. Mr. Bagnall, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to the, for the minister, there was a couple of times I don't think you had a chance to completely answer some questions. So just before I ask my questions, if you wanted to complete your answers to any questions, go ahead, but don't take too long or I won't be able to get my questions in. So you're muted. You're muted, Minister.
Sorry. I'm happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for your quick action the same day or the next day. And thank you for your sensitivity to make sure that you don't get involved technically so that a perpetrator couldn't get off on a technicality. I think we should, like the big study, the big problem we're looking at here, and I think all the committee members agree, is we want women in the military to be comfortable, to be able to come forward, be treated fairly, have the appropriate sentence for a perpetrator, and not to affect their careers. And I know that I want you to speak to your passion about this in a minute, but I know that you've already done a lot. We've done a lot with bills, perhaps more than in history, with Bill C-77, with the creation of the SMRC, the Path to Dignity, the response and support coordination for CAF members. So all that's been done before we even started our hearings over the year. But obviously, to everyone on the committee and yourself, and you've stated this, it's not enough. We need new answers. I think members from all parties have brought up the procedures need to be clarified, and most important, the culture, as all the experts said, the culture needs to be changed. So I'd just like you to speak about your passion. I know the members of the committee and all parties have that passion. That can you imagine a woman in their career and something terrible happens and they're not comfortable in coming forward under our present systems, as we've seen in a lot of documentation before this committee and during this committee. So to speak to your passion about getting this problem solved or moving it forward as much as we can, a passion that I know the committee members share.
Madam Chair, this is from day one that I wanted to focus on how do we create a better environment for everyone in the Canadian Armed Forces, especially women, visible minorities, members of the LGBTQ community, and Indigenous. We've seen the type of misconduct that has taken place, and we got to work on the changes. And as I can go through the list of changes, but we know that we have much more work to do. That's what I want to focus on. What are the changes that we need to make? So what I'd like to also be able to talk about here is we need to work towards what is greater independence looks like. How can we put greater trust into our people that they can come forward? Because that's clearly something that we need to work on. And there's tremendous talent even on your committee to be able to provide that advice. We will be looking at all opportunities and what are the changes that we need to make. For example, within the promotion system, as I've stated, having more women in key leadership roles, increasing our number, changing the policies that impact retention. We currently have a military justice review ongoing by Justice Fish that will take a look at the military justice system. We'll also have a separate panel, an independent panel that's looking at systemic racism and gender bias, including rights for LGBTQ members. And that panel will also give us advice on the systemic issues that we need to change. So as we look at addressing the immediate problem, which we absolutely have to do, the goal of this is to create that culture change and ultimately prevent these situations from happening, because that's the only way to get to a true zero tolerance policy.
Thank you, Minister. And the independence of various processes, I think, has been brought up a number of times. So I'm happy to hear from any witnesses or anyone on the committee how we can certainly improve that. It's got to be looked at. I'd just like to ask Ms. Bernichez, can the military police look into anonymous complaints?
Oui, bonjour, Madame.
Yes, good afternoon, Madam Chair. May I go ahead? Yes, please. Thank you.
Say is that we at National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces, we encourage all members to report any incident of inappropriate sexual behavior. Allegations of service offenses are investigated when a complaint is made or where there are other reasons to believe that a service offense may have been committed. So in that sense, An affected person can make a complaint to the military police. A victim or survivor can make a complaint to the military police. A third party can make a complaint to the military police, and an anonymous person can make a report to the military police. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Thank you very much. On to Mr. Benson, please.
Thanks. Thank you, Madam Chair. And Madam Chair, I will be sharing part of my time with my colleague, Alex Ruff. Minister, I'd like to turn to General Vance's pay raise and the order in council on May 9th, 2019, which gave him a $45,000 a year pay raise, a significant pay raise. You were responsible for bringing that to cabinet. And I'm wondering, before the decision was made, did you inform the cabinet of the uninvestigated sexual misconduct allegations against Mr. Vance so they could take that into consideration before they gave him his raise?
Madam Chair, I'm not involved in any of the performance pay. It's got nothing to do with cabinet.
So you're not responsible for bringing that to the cabinet?
I'm not. Performance pay is nothing to do with it. I'm the Minister of National Defense. It's got nothing to do with me when it comes to those things.
So you have no part in his performance review?
I don't have any part in his performance pay.
And would there be a review done before he was given a raise?
I would not know because I'm not part of that process.
Okay, thank you very much. It seems to me that that you really didn't take the allegation seriously, and you said you have, because clearly you know that the system right now that we have is dysfunctional, and that's why we've had all these reports done. And you simply did not follow up on seeing if these allegations were ever investigated. And I'm just curious why you say you took it seriously, but it appears you didn't take it seriously at all.
No, I absolutely took it seriously. I completely disagree with your assertion there. But when any inappropriate information comes, is to making sure that it takes immediate action. That was taken. Follow up, me intervening, doing follow up, is a potential interference with an investigation, and that's why you don't do those things.
But clearly, we know there cannot be. The one thing we've learned in the last month of all the testimony we've heard here is there is no way an independent investigation could have been done appropriately and independently. It just we know that the system is toxic and dysfunctional. You're the one person that was stepped out of that could have helped that happen. But you didn't do it.
No, absolutely. That's absolutely wrong. In fact, actually, as a Minister of National Defense, I'm sorry, no politician should ever be directing investigation, getting involved in investigation. That's absolutely wrong. And I will unequivocally state this, and even if as a private citizen, we'll fight for it, that no politician should be involved. This is just take it this way, Madam Chair, through you. The military police, there are police officers in the Canadian military, just like there is a police force in our civil society. We don't go directing them. We don't get to ask for briefings from them. Information is provided to them. They make the decision whether which way an investigation goes. It goes through a judicial process. It goes to court if it gets to that level, and the information does come out. And that's exactly what is happening. What we need to make sure is any allegation needs to get the appropriate independent authority so that the appropriate action can be taken. Anything otherwise of us getting involved is actually impeding an investigation, and you don't want politicians to get involved with that.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll cede the rest of my time to Alex Ruff, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, what is the slogan of the Royal Canadian Regiment?
I don't know.
Never pass a fault. When did Operation Honor start?
I believe it was during the Conservative time.
February 2015. What is the mission statement of Operation Honor?
Why don't you tell me?
To ensure sexual misconduct is never minimized, ignored, or excused so that the Canadian Armed Forces cultivates the inclusive and respectful work environment that embodies the ethical principles and core values of the profession of arms. Who does the CDS report to?
The CDS reports to the National Defense or the Minister of National Defense.
Who is accountable and responsible for the Department of National Defense?
Myself.
In your opinion, who is responsible and accountable for the failure of this allegation being investigated?
Madam Chair, through you, with all due respect for the line of questioning, what you're trying to do is talk about in a police investigation, a judicial process, and trying to make it seem like I have the ultimate authority. With all due respect, that's not true. My job is to making sure any allegations that comes forward, there's a proper process in place. And Madam Chair, the member knows very well that in terms of this, we have clear processes in place to have independence of our police, that has to be independent of our political system, and our judiciary needs to be independent. So yes, I'm absolutely responsible.
Okay, thank you very much. On to Monsieur Robillard, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here today. I would like to start by acknowledging your passion for the Canadian Armed Forces, for the equality between men and women, and for the protection of all its members. I would like to ask you to excuse me ahead of time if my questions seem repetitive, but I think it's important that there be not a single ounce of doubt possible. Minister, the Ombudsman had said that he was aware of the directives that he had to work under. He already described to this committee in 2014 and communicated press releases in 2015 describing how to manage cases of sexual harassment. Do you know why he would go around those possibilities and would address himself to you?
Have the answer to this question. I would hope that ombudsman or anybody have any information to go to the appropriate authorities. In this case, just like in civil society, you go to the police. In this, for us, there's proper processes in place. You go to the military police, and we have a separate investigative service for this. That's independent of the chain of command. The ombudsman is also independent of the chain of command. So I can understand, where they say that, well, the chief of defense staff reports to me. Well, the chief of defense staff is part of the chain of command. That should have no bearing of any action that needs to be taken. If a complaint comes forward, regardless of rank, it needs to be taken seriously. And in this case here, that's exactly what took place. And also to make sure that the very next day, the appropriate authorities, in this case here, who govern positions of governor and council positions, they were informed of this, to making sure that the proper follow-up was done, to take this out of the political sphere and put it in the hands of independents so that the information can go to the appropriate, whether it's police authorities or any other action that could be taken independently.
Monsieur le Ministre, l'Ombudsman a dit...
Minister, the Ombudsman stated that he went to see you to obtain advice on how to deal with the allegations of this nature. I was wondering if you could clarify for this committee, is it the role of the Ombudsman to ask advice from the Minister?
When I actually took a look at this when the Ombudsman was created, the Ombudsman office was created so that there was a separate entity from the chain of command so that members of the Canadian Armed Forces could go to have their concerns heard, and that action could be taken independent of the chain of command. And then the Ombudsman office does a lot of other work as well. For example, taking a look at members, issues of pay or other type of issues that need to be changed to give the minister the advice. So the role of the Ombudsman is actually to give advice to the minister, not the other way around.
Monsieur le Ministre.
Minister, we have heard the Prime Minister saying that politicians should not interfere in investigations. Actually, we saw members of the opposition, such as our much-loved colleague, Mr. Bazan, criticize you for not being involved in this affair, but who also said earlier that political interference mines the justice system. So could you please clarify for this committee what I thought the committee should already know, why politicians should not carry out investigations on allegations of misconduct?
I mean, that is such a dangerous path to ever go down. To have elected officials to be able to start investigations, direct investigations. We normally look at other countries that can do this, and we've seen other countries with the path that goes down. There's an absolute reason in democracies. We have separate systems. We have the political systems where we, what we, as all of us, are part of. We have our police that are independent, and then we have our judicial system that is independent. And inside the military, our military police are trained police officers, just like in civil society. And information needs to go to them, and they conduct investigations independent of the chain of command. For any politician, including myself, yes, I'm in charge of the minister, the entire national defense. For me to launch an investigation on any individual as a politician or direct an investigation, my God, that's absolutely wrong. We should never be doing that. And anybody suggesting that is also wrong, but it's up to them if they want to pursue that and explain that to Canadians.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you. On to Monsieur Fortin, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Madame la.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, I understand that your position is to say that you cannot carry out investigations. I don't think anyone here thinks that you should have investigated, but we're thinking that, as you said, you're ultimately responsible for everything that happens as far as the defense goes. But I understand that you don't share our opinion. You're saying I can't get involved. But you also made sure that the Privy Council office be informed. You told me earlier that you had some discussion with people from Privy Council on this topic afterwards. But we also know that nothing ever happened. General Vance was never the object of any investigation or charges. Are you saying that the Privy Council office was not effective?
Madam Chair, that you were talking about. Yes, I am charged of national defense. And
Mais sur le conseil privé, Monsieur le Ministre.
But as far as the Privy Council goes, Minister, did the Privy Council do the work that they should have done, in your opinion? We just have a few more seconds.
Interpretation was slow. I apologize. In this case here, what I can do is talk about my actions here. Is that information was provided to them, and what we can also, with Mr. Walburn's testimony, that they did.
Est-ce que vous pensez que le conseil privé a fait son travail?
I'll let it go a little.
Do you think that the Privy Council office did it's the work it should have done?
I'm sorry. So this is where I can't talk about the actions of others. I can talk about what we did, but one thing I can assure you, which has already had come out in testimony, that they did follow up with them, and that the right people had the information to go forward. And I don't know why the Ombudsman would not provide the information or take other steps. That is not for me to decide. No. I have to remain independent from that.
Mais vous nous dites que vous avez.
You're telling us that you advised the Privy Council office that they were aware of it. So that's your defense. The Privy Council was aware of it the next day. And you said that you spoke to them again on several occasions after that, but we know there was ever any action. So my question is, were you disappointed? Would you say the Privy Council did not do the work it should have done?
Madam Chair, first of all, I never spoke to Privy Council. It's only through my staff I would ask the question. I did not want to, because that would be interference with it. But I can't say, I'm not here to describe their actions, because I can't.
Right. Thank you very much. Mr. Garrison, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. With respect, Mr. Minister, your whole argument today seems to turn on the existence of what I would call a unicorn, and that's that magical independent authority that exists to investigate claims of sexual misconduct against the Chief of Defense Staff. When you cite the Ombudsman's office, we know that the military ombudsman has no legislative authority. It's created by a directive from the minister and it reports to the minister. And the PCO, as I mentioned before, reports to the Prime Minister. And with regard to Order in Council appointments, really does little more than assembles resumes and checks references. It's not an investigative body in any way. But my final, I guess, proof that this body doesn't exist is that in her report on sexual misconduct in the Canadian military in April of 2015, Madame Justice Deschamps called for the creation of an independent authority, and that independent authority to be given responsibility for services to victims, responsibility for taking complaints, and responsibility for investigations. So nearly 6 years ago, we had a recommendation that such an independent authority be created. Today, you're trying to say it already exists, when if it did, then why did Madame Deschamps make this recommendation? And of course, if it doesn't, why haven't we followed up on her recommendation 6 years later?
Madam Chair, what I'll do is have the Deputy Minister talk about some of the aspects of SMRC and Madame Deschamps' report, because the work that they have been doing with Dr. Preston is significant progress, but we know we have more work to do. But Madam Chair, as a member talked about the unicorn, I'm sorry, when it comes to the independence of investigations from politicians, if you think that's a unicorn, that's for you to decide. For me, that is absolutely fundamental to making sure that the politicians are not involved with any type of investigation, because it needs to be absolutely independent. And there is a process in place. But having said this, it is not, we need to make improvements to it, and we will. Deputy Minister, if you can add some thoughts to that.
No,
please.
thank you very much, Mr. Minister. You know good and well I'm not saying that lack of political interference is the unicorn. I'm saying there is no independent authority.
Madam Chair, I'm having a hard time understanding what you're saying, because that's,
well, because
you're telling me to do
this.
To take action, but I'm telling you it's interference, and you're saying that by me doing this is creating this unicorn. I'm sorry, what you're trying to paint me into a corner and trying to paint this picture. And Madam Chair, I'm not going to let the member try to do this. It is absolutely wrong. And I'll be honest with you, I know the member well, and for him to do this, I find this wrong. I'm happy to answer questions, but the line of questioning that he's trying to tarnish, if there is legitimate wrong, I'm happy to answer those questions, but he's not allowing me to. So you can't paint a picture and then expect me not to respond to that.
All right,
I'm asking about the recommendation of Madame Deschamps.
Thank you.
I was trying. I had the Deputy Minister would have given you information on that if you had allowed it.
All right, thank Mr. Bazan, please.
Minister, just follow up on Mr. Garrison. His comments. Just want to talk about the directive and the role of the ombudsman. And it says right in the DAOD 50471 under Part 4 of the ombudsman, it says, A, shall investigate any matter referred to the ombudsman by written direction of the minister. And there's a memo that was circulated by the media that came through Access to Information, a memo from the Privy Council office on March 16th, 2018. And it says in here at the very last bullet, the directive suggests that this would prevent the ombudsman from investigating, and typically the ombudsman would investigate a complaint to the effect that one of those processes failed a complaint, which is that they didn't give consent. So, Minister, do you believe that you keep blaming the ombudsman, but until he had consent from the complainant, he couldn't move forward? And he also needed written direction from you. Did you provide that written direction?
Madam Chair, no, that's not true. Just because you read that directive here, that investigation does not include investigation powers when it comes to claims like this, especially when it comes to criminal or police investigations. That is absolutely wrong. The ombudsman does not need my permission.
You're confirming then
to conduct
that the ombudsman can't direct, but you can. So why didn't you direct it to an outside police force to make sure that it was investigated properly?
Madam Chair, we made sure that the information that the person had can actually go directly. Myself getting involved in the evidentiary chain is wrong. Jag, I don't know if you want to add to when it comes.
Ask questions to the minister. So Michael Warnick, the former clerk of the Privy Council, has confirmed that he was aware on March the 2nd and was part of the memo that was circulated in the media through Access to Information. Did you ever speak to the former clerk of the Privy Council about these allegations around General Vance, and or are you aware of anyone else from your office that was speaking to him?
I did not speak to the former the clerk regarding this because my asking any more questions about any type of allegation or investigations like this would be considered as interference.
Staffer speaking directly
Sorry,
to the Privy Council office.
You got cut off in the first bit there.
So I just said it. So it's okay for your political staff, your chief of staff, your former chief of staff, Zita Estravis, to have those conversations on your behalf with the Ombudsman and with the Privy Council office?
Madam Chair, let's be clear here. My staff there, my chief of staff, made sure that the Privy Council was informed. That's exactly what we needed to do because, as a member knows, and he stated that he knows the National Defence Act extremely well, and also he was the Parliamentary Secretary of National Defence. And by the way, I have a few questions regarding his actions.
I get to ask the question to your minister, as you know.
No.
Just
let me answer the question here. So no.
Minister, I just want to go forward. Now, we know on March the 5th, your former chief of staff emailed the Ombudsman to follow up on a conversation that she had with Janine Sherman. So how many people in your office were aware that Ms. Sherman had followed up with Mr. Walborn?
When our job was to, as my chief of staff has forwarded the information, to making sure that was done. At that time, we needed to make sure that the independence of the investigation was to occur. Once the confirmation that they had received the information, our involvement has been left, it was to be left out because us getting further involved is an impediment of the investigation. What we needed to do was making sure it got there. And in Mr. Walburn's own testimony, that they actually that they contacted him the next day.
At any point, were there any meetings or conference calls between senior members of your office or the Deputy Minister's office and the Privy Council office on this topic?
I can speak from my behalf and my team that we had made sure we did a follow up to making sure that the Privy Council had the appropriate information, and they did.
So were any of your political staff or staff from the Prime Minister's office involved in those meetings and conference calls with the Privy Council office, the Ombudsman's office potentially, or the Deputy Minister's office?
As I stated, myself or the Prime Minister, politicians should not get involved in the investigation. What we needed to do, and we did, is making sure the information got to the Privy Council office, who are responsible for governor and council appointments. And obviously
I get quite a kick
that's
that
exactly
in
what's
this memo from Privy Council, you keep referring to General Vance as a GIC appointee instead of using names. So it's kind of like code words like we had with Admiral Mark Norman. Now, we know that sometime in March, your former chief of staff contacted Ella Marquez, who is a senior advisor to the Prime Minister, regarding these allegations against General Vance. Were you aware that that senior staff from your office was also talking to the Prime Minister's office? And how were they now involved?
Well, during the time that when this incident had taken place, my chief of staff not only contacted the Privy Council office, but also contacted Mr. Marquez to inform him what was transpiring.
All right, thank you. Time is up.
Your first conversation.
We let that go for a little while longer than normal. Madame Van der Bell.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here today. Minister, we know that you've spent your entire career protecting people, serving our country, serving people, and your dedication to equality and inclusion is something that has run throughout your career. And it's evident today that you took every effort possible to make sure that this investigation was not politicized and that the proper processes were followed. At the end of the day, when you have somebody who doesn't want to go through a formal investigation and complaint, what it does tell us is that and we've heard this from other places, that there is an issue in the Canadian Armed Forces of people who, for whatever reason, are afraid to come forward. They're afraid of reprisal. They're afraid of what it will do to their careers. And I know that you talked about all options being on the table, of making sure that we continue to do the important work to fix this problem. You mentioned in your opening remarks an independent external review. You also mentioned independent reporting structures. Are there other things? For instance, we know that peer support is very important. We know that sometimes what women need is to just talk to other people who've been through the same thing, because it can feel very difficult when you feel like you're the only one. And I know that some very brave volunteers have been doing this kind of peer support. Is there anything in the works that would help to provide either funding or support to these kinds of groups that, similar to what combat trauma experiences would be? Is there anything that you're working on to make sure that that happens?
Sorry, I was on mute again. Madam Chair, thank you very much for that question. This is the heart of everything that we should be focused on, which is how can we make the lives of our women and men in the Canadian Armed Forces, especially women who have dealt with such horrible situations. And even though that we have made great progress, for example, having great representation, creating a pipeline of more women to go into those positions. When we started with 6 general officers, I sign off on general officer promotions, and now we have 14. And we're going to have a vice chief of defense staff who will be a female. And my goal of it was to making sure that the pipeline goes throughout the Canadian Armed Forces, so you have greater representation. But we also need to deal with what's in front of us. And so what we need to do is have a place where now people don't get bounced around. And I've heard stories like this where they didn't know exactly where to go. Go to a place where they can have their story heard. Be empowered to know that they can go forward. But if they don't want to, get the right support where they need it. But more importantly, get the legal advice, get the police connection also to it if it's needed. A one place. That's what we're working towards. And we also need to look at the independence. We're seeing more often now, and through just most recent examples, that people felt that there were going to be reprisals. Even though we have very aggressively dealt with this, clearly we have way more work to do on this. And we have an independent military justice review that's currently ongoing. But ultimately, what I feel like total culture change is going to happen when we have more women that are going to be well supported inside the Canadian Armed Forces, so that this cannot continue. But if it does, to know that every single one of them has the ability that they cannot ever be told that they can't say anything, to be able to come forward, that their actions will be taken. And if somebody doesn't listen to them seriously, well, there's going to be consequences for anybody who interferes with that. That's where we actually need to get to. It is actually happening now, but obviously it's not happening to the extent that we want to.
And Minister, while there's been a number of resources and a number of things that are in place for survivors, we've heard a number of survivors say they don't know what those are. And is there a way, I've heard mention of no wrong door. Is there something that you are planning to do that would allow people, maybe something online that would allow women and the men, the male allies, to know exactly what resources are available and where they can turn?
Yes, in fact, actually, we do have an online website on this. There's other mechanisms in place, but we do need to do better at this. And I was just going to ask my deputy minister possibly to kind of elaborate on some of the more detailed work that is being done.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is as much in the JAGS field as mine. There is a consolidated website that now shows all the access opportunities for anybody who wishes to report a situation. Also, that lists and details all of the support mechanisms for those who've experienced trauma or wish to talk about their trauma as part of our Bill 77 response. I think mostly more appropriate at this point if the JAG were to detail that.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Est-ce que je...
Thank you, Madam Chair. May I go ahead?
Thank you. So as mentioned by the Minister and the Deputy Minister, we've been hearing as of late that the main problem for those who wanted to take action was to know what to do and where to turn to take action. And so we very rapidly looked at a way to have a consolidated resource available. This is a web page that was launched 3 days ago. It is found on the Government of Canada website. And if you Google victims and survivors of service offense, it will bring you directly to that incredibly important and useful tool that we will keep on ameliorating as time will go by, and we will want the input of those who visit that webpage to let us know what they want to see more on it. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. Ms. Alice Liff, please.
Thank you very much. Am I on? Yep. Janine Sherman testified to the committee that your office would have taken any order in councils through cabinet regarding appointees. Does that include a May 2019 order in council that raised General Vance's salary?
I'm not aware of that.
Well, Minister, Her Excellency the Governor General, on the recommendation of the Prime Minister, fixes the remuneration and certain conditions of employment of General Vance, Chief of the Defence Staff, as set out in the annex schedule, which salary is within the range 260,600 to 306,500, effective April 1st, 2018. I guess it was backdated. So, is it your testimony that you did not take this OIC to cabinet?
Madam Chair, I don't get involved with salaries of public officials.
Well, Minister, orders in councils are decisions that are made by cabinet, and recommendations to the Prime Minister, to the Governor General, to an increase in salary is made by cabinet. So cabinet ministers would have signed this order in council. So are you saying, Minister, that you were not one of the ministers that took this to cabinet?
Madam Chair, as I stated, I am not involved with salaries for public officials.
Well, some ministers signed it, and it's interesting then that the Minister of National Defense did not make a recommendation to the Prime Minister to take it to the Governor General to increase the Chief of the Defence Staff's salary. Is that your testimony?
Madam Chair, as I stated, I don't get involved with the salary of public officials.
And so you didn't
Chair,
advise, did you advise any of your cabinet colleagues that, including the Prime Minister, that there were unresolved sexual misconduct allegations against General Vance?
Madam Chair, as I stated, when it comes to any information, it was always brought to the appropriate authorities so that independent investigation can be taken.
But did you make anyone aware that the investigation into the allegations had yet to be resolved around General Vance?
Madam Chair, I reported this to the appropriate authorities. When it came to informing the Privy Council office, PMO was informed in terms that I had raised these concerns with the Privy Council office. The Prime Minister only learned of this investigation in the media, like everybody else. But I don't get involved with the salaries of public officials.
And Minister, does this investigation into these serious allegations remain outstanding today? Or has this investigation been completed into General Vance and it's resolved?
Madam Chair, I don't get involved with investigations.
You don't get involved, Minister, but it is your responsibility to ensure that they occur and that the good order and discipline of the Canadian Forces.
You expecting the ultimate power to be given to a minister? That is absolutely wrong. The power to investigate is separate. I completely disagree with your assertions that should be the case.
Minister, is it against the code? Minister, is it against the Code of Service Discipline for a senior officer to have a sexual relationship with a subordinate?
Madam Chair,
is it
any inappropriate behavior by any member of the Canadian Armed Forces is wrong?
So then you're saying that, yes, it is against the Code of Service Discipline.
Madam Chair, as I said, it is any inappropriate behavior such as this is wrong.
Is there anyone in the Canadian Armed Forces who is not a subordinate of the Chief of the Defence Staff?
Obviously, you know the answer to that. The Chief of Defence Staff is the top general.
Thank you. Conservatives called for a freeze on all senior officer promotions and postings to ensure only deserving behavior was rewarded. But the general and flag officer promotions were just released. Can you guarantee that no one on that list is complicit through their actions or their silence in any form of sexual or other misconduct?
Madam Chair, first of all, when it comes to promotions, it is important that members who have been working diligently within the Canadian Armed Forces continue to get the recognition that they deserve. When it comes to promotions, we do ask the questions and attestation. Have there been misconduct in your previous career? Also, making sure there's culture change is how, if there was misconduct inside the chain of command, how did they deal with it? Because we wanted to make sure leaders that we're selecting are the ones that are going to take things seriously. So those are the things that from attestation we have taken seriously. But I also have a question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Time is up. Mr. Baker, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Minister, I have a couple of questions for you, and I'm going to try to save 30 seconds for Ms. May to ask a question. So I'll work through this as quickly as I can. Minister, let me repeat this. In Gary Walburn's testimony, he stated that he was surprised that PCO was reaching out to him. He also stated in a response to a question from Mr. Garrison that PCO let the matter drop after the meeting on the 2nd of March. Subsequent to this testimony, Global News reported that he engaged in a number of email exchanges with PCO regarding the investigation. Amanda Connolly reported that Mr. Walburn wrote PCO on March 6, 2018, stating, quote, "As with all cases given to the Ombudsman's office, we only move forward with the complainant's written consent to do so," close quote. And he according to Connolly's reporting also stated, quote, "Options have been proposed. I now await directions as to their wishes on how to move forward. Once they have made a decision and with their permission, I will engage as directed," close quote. It seems to me that Mr. Walburn's reported actions after the March 1st meeting are not consistent with an individual who was surprised that PCO was investigating the allegations. Do you have any comment on what took place after your conversations with Mr. Walburn?
I mean, obviously, I can't talk about what took place afterwards, but what I can say is in Mr. Walburn's own testimony, even though my recollection that he did not ask for advice, but I gave it, which was also to go to the appropriate authorities, including when it comes to PCO. So there shouldn't have been any surprise there. But also when an allegation has come forward, we expect anybody to take it seriously and to take it to its furthest conclusion.
Okay. Thank you, Minister. We've heard that one option presented by the Ombudsman was that you could have pursued confronting the former Chief of Defense Staff, Vance, directly about the allegations. Do you have any thoughts on if that could have been done while maintaining the confidentiality of the complainant?
You know, there's a lot of people who think that what is the right thing to do. And from my own experience as a police officer, you don't, when somebody has brought information forward, and in this case, they didn't want to have their identity unveiled, going to the actual person when you don't have information could potentially would absolutely jeopardize the investigation. That would be absolutely inappropriate.
Thank you, Minister. So I turn, Chair, I'd like to turn the rest of my time to Ms. May. I think there's about 2 minutes and a bit remaining.
No, I'm afraid we're actually running out of time here, so I'm
30,
sorry.
30 seconds, Madam Chair.
Okay, 30
please.
seconds, Ms. May. Go ahead.
I'll put it. I think a lot of fair-minded Canadians have this question in their mind, Mr. Minister. I ask this open-heartedly. It appears there's a contradiction. On February 19th, when you testified to this committee, you said you were, quote, as shocked as anyone by the allegations of sexual misconduct by the Chief of Staff, General Vance. And we've been told by Gary Walburn that on March 1st, 2018, he told you about them. I'd like to maintain in my mind that you're both honest men, and I would love you to explain what appears to be a contradiction.
Madam Chair, thank you for that opportunity, because I don't want anybody to ever think that that information was what we heard back then. That was not the case. I didn't know any of that information. That's why I can honestly put hand on heart to say I was just as shocked. And more importantly, to see that members of our Canadian Armed Forces for 2 decades were dealing with this, that was not the meeting that took place on March 1st.
All right, thank
And
you
this
very
is what
much. Sorry, we're running out of time here. Monsieur Fortin, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, there is a military policeman, Mr. Silman, who said on the 5th this date that he is working on sexual assault cases where you referred the ombudsman. So officers were constantly trying to interfere with his work. And so he developed distrust in terms of the internal justice system of the Army. What do you have to tell us about that?
Unacceptable. Regardless of rank, regardless of your position, no one can interfere with an investigation of police. Okay. The military police are independent of the chain of command.
Okay,
they
merci,
also have the ability.
Ça répond à ma question.
Thank you, Minister. It answers my question. But in the end, Minister, there's a woman who's been a victim of sexual assault in the Army. If she cannot turn to the military police because the police have the officer, they can't do anything because officers are interfering. So if they can't turn to the ombudsman because the ombudsman says, well, if it concerns the Chief of Defense Staff, I can't do anything. If she can't turn to you, the Minister of Defense, because you're saying the minister cannot do anything about it. If she can't turn to the Prime Minister, who says I'm not aware of anything, the minister didn't tell me. To whom should people turn when the Chief of Defense Staff commits unacceptable actions? Towards whom should the victim turn if no one in your government is responsible?
Very clear. Regardless of rank, from the top all the way down to the lowest private, the rank doesn't matter. They have any person who has an allegation, has the ability, and should go to the military police, and so that they can independently investigate.
La police militaire dit on peut pas enquêter.
The military police says we cannot investigate. Officers are interfering, so I'm not the one saying it.
With an investigation.
C'est un membre de la police militaire qui... Vous nous dites que vous étiez au courant depuis 2000.
You're telling us that you were aware since 2018, but you did nothing other than tell the Privy Council office about it. It didn't move, and 3 years later, you're telling us you're surprised.
Garrison, please.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just want to state on the record, given the tone in the minister's opening statement and some of the remarks he made, that certainly in the case of opposition members here, we're all trying to get to a Canadian military where women can serve equally because an end comes to the tolerance of sexual misconduct. And so I just think we all need to be very clear about that. I've spoken to too many women, as I know others on the committee have, whose careers were cut short by the tolerance of sexual misconduct in the military. So I know that this is the end of today's session, and I just want to ask the minister, in retrospect, what happened here is that not just one accusation of sexual misconduct against General Vance, but several have been dealt with or are being dealt with. And what we appear to have now is a situation from 2018, where we had someone who served as Chief of Defense Staff and was ostensibly in charge of all the programs to root out sexual misconduct, who in fact had been multiple times involved in allegations of sexual misconduct. So in retrospect, as the minister have any suggestions of what might have happened to avoid this period, which has now caused a crisis of confidence in the senior leadership's commitment to root out sexual misconduct?
Mr. Garrison, I'm glad you raised that question. This is exactly what we need to get to the bottom of. And this is why we're going to conduct an external review to get to the bottom of this while not interfering with the independence of the investigation. It is absolutely concerning. And I apologize if I came on strong, but you have, but I don't, your passion for the changes that you want in the Canadian Armed Forces, I truly believe. But you also have to understand where I come from as well. It's a very different experience and what people perceive it. But ultimately, throughout all this, we've had a great conversation, but very little of it was actually talking about the changes that we need. And I'm glad you brought that focus back. because this is where we need to look at those recommendations. We do have an independent justice review going on by Justice Fish. We have an independent panel that's looking at all systemic issues, including gender bias and LGBTQ2 members as well. We have to look at that greater independence. Probably the biggest concern for me that I have and that I need to fix is that members could not come forward because they were fearful of the chain of command. So we do need to look at what that independence is going to look like. We have some ideas. We've already had some meetings, and I would love to be able to get advice from all of you as you look at the various studies, because ultimately, I do believe all of us can agree on this, that we want to make sure that we create an inclusive environment for everybody.
All right, thank you very much. Sorry, Mr. Bazan, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and the last one up on our side, I just want to say that I'm incredibly disappointed with the tone from the minister today, as well as statement. You know, I just want to say there was a few things he said. He'd like to talk about Bill C-77, the Victims of Crime Bill, and the Victims Bill of Rights that were in that. Well, that passed back, you know, a couple of years ago, and here we are, and it's still not been brought into force. That's a failure on his behalf, not to make sure that happens. I do want the minister to produce some documents. One is the order in council approved by cabinet gave the change in remuneration to General Vance of May 2019. I'd also ask that he provide any written directive to the ombudsman that instructed him to go out and do an investigation following the March 1st, 2018 meeting. You know, Minister, you looked the other way for 3 years. You knew that there was allegations against General Vance, and you never once took action other than pass it off to your chief of staff and took it to Privy Council. We know how you acted when there was allegations against Vice Admiral Mark Norman. You called an RCMP investigation, and he was suspended.
Okay, Mr. Bazan, what is your question?
It's my time, Madam Chair. I can do a statement if I want. So I'll right now, and then with Admiral MacDonald, when the allegations came known, it was 3 weeks from the time the investigation started till he actually stepped aside when again it made the news. But Admiral MacDonald stepped aside so that the chain of command would not be compromised, compromising the investigation, because we know that the National Investigative Service and the Canadian Forces, we know that the military police report to the Provost Marshal, who reports to the Vice Chief of Defence Staff, who goes to the Chief of Defence Staff. So my question is that over 3 years that you knew there were serious allegations, why did you not have either a board of inquiry and appoint a military judge to conduct that investigation, or ask the CDS, General Vance, to step aside so that we could have a proper internal investigation without any influence coming through the chain of command?
Madam Chair, with all due respect, I take every allegation very seriously. What I'm also focused on is dealing with what's in front of us, but also we need to talk about prevention as well. And one question that really is always burning for me, and it should be for all members, is the media reports that there was an investigation in 2015 when the member was Parliamentary Secretary of the National Defence, when the selection process was done for General Vance. So if there was an investigation done, those are those things, a lot of questions I think we should be also asking is, what was the decision for the selection process during that time for General Vance, when there was an actual investigation, apparently, that was reported in 2015.
McDonald.
So
that was very public as well.
I did not. Well, here's the other thing. No, I did not order any investigation of the RCMP.
Right,
I have no authority to direct the RCMP. Absolutely not. So you can make a statement, but I'm not going to let you, Mr. Bazan, allow you to put all these false assertions into the public.
Right. Thank you very much. Madame Vanderbilt.
Mr. I would just like to end by talking about the fact that, I mean, we know that you've spent your entire career protecting people. And now we have a situation where it's coming forward where there are women in the Canadian Armed Forces that have not felt protected. And I just wanted to ask you how that makes you feel as somebody who has been committed to equality your whole entire life. How does that make you feel? And what would you say to the women of the Canadian Armed Forces?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me this opportunity, because ultimately, when I'm talking, I know that probably members of the Canadian Armed Forces, women, were watching this right now. And they see men arguing with one another when what we should be doing is talking about how we're going to make their life better. And from day one when we came into this, my whole thing was how can we make things better? One of the first aspects of doing this was putting people first in our defense policy. And members of the committee contributed to this. We made changes. For example, there were things like what we learned, policies in place. Imagine this by previous governments, that when a woman wanted to have a family, when they went on maternity leave, they got it. But that wasn't included as part of their service. They had to serve longer. The same months that they were pregnant, they had to add that time to their service. That's ridiculous. We changed that. And there's many things that we can talk about, but ultimately it's not about what we did in the past. We got to talk about what we're going to do now and into the future to create that culture change for all women. And the courage of these women that have come forward, it should be the impetus for everyone in the Canadian Armed Forces, how seriously we all take this. To have every survivor that feels that there was any type of inappropriate conduct had to them, that they can come forward, they will be heard, that there is the police force that will investigate, they will be protected. And if they don't want to come forward at this time, they're going to get the right support for this. We want to give them the power back in this case. But ultimately, we want to bring that whole culture change so that when anybody joins the Canadian Armed Forces, they know that they're going to be protected.
All right, thank you.
And be able to advance. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you for the testimony today and appearing for this study. Is the committee in agreement to adjourn? All right, meeting adjourned.